Launcher is how versatile it can be. You'll be able to take this, straight into a ship corridor and blow a bunch of people up in there. And you'll even be able to take it out into the wide open spaces on planet surfaces, and if you're good enough, still be able to hit and do a bunch of damage to people. So adding new damage types or delivery systems into Star Citizen is purely to link in with a long-term goal, and that goal is to provide people with as much choice as possible in the way that they like to play the game. So the grenade launcher is a very different weapon compared to what we've got in game at the moment, and therefore it will suit an entirely different style of play. Right now, most of our weapons, we've either got like one end of the spectrum, which is the missile launcher, or the railgun, which are like super heavy ordnance weapons, and then we've kind of got our more traditional ballistic and energy weapons that fire like very fast moving projectiles. So the main challenge with the grenade launcher is really getting the balance right. Just because it is an explosive weapon, it's very easy for it to go one way or the other if it's far too good or it's not good enough to use, basically. So we've compared that with a normal grenade, which we've had a couple of bouncing problems with in the past. Like sometimes the kill radius on that was far too big, and the damage radius on it beyond that was too small. So we've actually revisited that, got that feeling a lot better, and then we based this grenade launcher and the damages these propelled grenades actually do off that. And initially they were one-to-one the same, and we found that it was far too powerful because the radius on the explosion was far too big for something that you could fire so quickly and had so much ammo for. So we reduced that in a little bit, and we extended the damage radius so you're still able to damage people, and we've got it feeling quite good. And playtests within Theatres of War has helped us tune this a lot. We've had a few playtests in the map, and it's really kind of demonstrated how on our shooting range we initially tune things, and sometimes that's at closer ranges. So when we've actually got a much more open area to fire at people, where people are behind cover, they're like 50 to 100 meters to 200 meters away, and you're trying to hit them with a weapon, it really starts kind of like calling out the situations that people are seeing more often in the PU, on planets especially. So it's really helped us push out the ranges of a lot of our weapons, and the grenade launchers included there. So where we're at right now, the weapon is essentially fully functional. All of the feature work is done. We're still awaiting some of the content to come in, like final audio, final animations, as it kind of goes through to the end of the content pipeline. And obviously I can't wait to see what the backers actually do with this thing, from like 100-meter plus skill shots on people to accidentally killing themselves when trying to take a bunch of people out in corridors.
Continuing to expand the various weapon types is just one more way the content and feature teams are working to provide more player agency for Star Citizens as they choose how to make their way through the persistent universe. And you can bet the work won't stop with either last quarter's Electron weapons or the upcoming grenade launcher in Alpha 3.11. But up next, it's time for another sprint report, so let's get to it. In the first of two lighting updates this week, one of the existing challenges of our current particle lighting model is that the particles can get very bright depending on the lighting situation, far brighter than they should be in real life. And that's why the graphics and VFX teams have been working together to move the existing particle lighting model closer to a physically based rendering one. Yep, PBR is coming for particles too. This new systemic solution will ensure that particles are no longer brighter than the light source that hits them, and as an added bonus, will not only look better, but will save VFX artists time when they no longer have to manually balance the particle brightness in each scene, because every particle will now simply work in all the various lighting situations throughout the persistent universe. Better looking and less work. Remember that, we're going to come back to it again later. Additionally, the work of updating the day and night cycle looks for existing landing zones continues with L19 in Lorville, and a recently completed sprint exploring the effort to get those massive security towers up above to search for troublemakers and security risks to Hurston's prosperity down below. It's a small touch, but it's one more way the lighting team is working to give each landing zone its own distinct look and personality, not just between themselves, but within their own days and nights. Each quarter, the vehicle content team is converting more and more ships to the use of our updated hard surface shader. Now, this conversion is essential to implement not only the wear and tear that will occur from the continued use of your spacecraft, but the eventual addition of new paint schemes and libraries that will bring much color to the verse. The examples you see here are just common development themes used for testing purposes, but we're going to keep an eye out for the paints that will reach in-game shops in future updates. Up next is Better Looking and Less Work Part 2. Now, you may have heard about recent improvements to the Organics painting tool that looks to continue advancing the tech our artists use to populate Star Citizen's planets and moons. And here we've got sample images showing the repainting of existing locations in Stanton. Now, as you can see, the updated painting tool has a greater range of variation in assets and overall provides a more interesting combination between rock and brush and tree and color and everything else that can dot a planet's surface. As with previous updates, the new tool doesn't just get us a better looking brush of terrain, it's also faster and more efficient to use than ever before. Important advancements necessary to finish off the planets and moons of the upcoming Pyro system and beyond. Up in space, teams are finishing up work on the cargo deck exteriors ahead of their intended inclusion in the upcoming Alpha 311. Now, we'll hear specifics about the what and the how and the why in a dedicated segment here in the coming weeks. But these things just look so cool, we wanted to squeeze a few of them in here this week. Now, not only are there multiple variations to go along with the multiple stations that are populated throughout the Stanton system, take special note of the colored cargo containers sprinkled within. Discussions are currently underway now to explore parity of metric and function with the same kinds of containers players will one day carry on their Hull series spacecraft. And while we're talking space stations, it's been a while. You didn't think we'd forgotten about docking, did you? So let's take a look now at some concepts currently being explored for ship-to-station docking. The team recently completed a sprint exploring potential options for extendable docking arms that can be used to allow spacecraft that are maybe a little too big to fit on landing pads or inside hangars safe traversal between vehicle and hangar. Now, as it's said every time we show concepts, and this will be no exception, these are explorations of idea and theme used not only to identify the direction we want to move in, but also to determine those we do not just as well. Now, a bit beyond the normal concept is this animatic that's being used to further explore the visual intent this particular approach was going for. Now, as this bridge extends out, the idea here is to avoid something that seemed too structurally sound, while at the same time avoiding the sense that you were merely just walking through a catwalk exposed to the void around you and could easily be knocked out by some kicked up space dust. This extendable concept would also have buffer arms at the end designed to absorb impact and a second stage connecting collar to make that final seal to the newly arrived ship. It's basically a two-stage soft dock and hard seal kind of deal this concept is going for. As with most things in the Star Citizen universe, when the various other disciplines like lighting, VFX, sound, and dialogue and more come into play, it's easy to imagine how a relatively mundane task like ship docking can become a rich and cinematic experience when all is said and done. Finally, with some time left at the end of their sprint and not content merely with an impressive animatic, the team went ahead and brought this concept mesh directly into Engine to better gauge what this option might look like expanding out from an existing station while validating the distances that are being discussed. What you're seeing here is the exact same thing our developers saw when they first brought this concept in, and it's safe to say it got a lot of our team members excited about the possibilities of ship-to-station docking in Star Citizen's future. You can just about see the advertisements along the wall. Does Stanton have a salt lick? No? Texans will know what I'm talking about. So what did we learn about this week? Well, we learned that new weapon types like grenade launchers are about more than just blowing people up. They're about providing more choice for players when they go into combat. That when building a game of Star Citizen's size and scope, it's not enough to make tech that just looks better. You need systems that make work faster to go with them. and that sometimes a concept is little more than a series of thumbnail sketches, and other times they're impressive animatics you import into Engine and walk around to check the scale. They're both good. For Inside Star Citizen, I'm Jared Huckabee. We'll see you next week.
So, have you, you've seen...
In a dangerous galaxy, who can you trust to watch your back? Drake's Cutlass Blue lets you take the law into your own hands. With all the attitude you expect from a Cutlass. Formidable suppression options offering a range of lethality, supercharged thrusters, plus an integrated quantum dampener and onboard containment system. The Cutlass Blue. Bad news for the bad guys. Only from Drake.
Friends, wait for the end of this video. Day 2, and tomorrow I'm blasting off to Microtech and the Intergalactic Aerospace. IAE, y'all know what I mean. Light workout before my Stormwall tour. I'm seriously so excited for this and want to say thanks again to Origin, my amazing sponsors. People are obsessed with these Stormwalls. See, I'm learning. The person in this costume, I mean, how adorable. I'm on this shuttle thing, guys, way less fancy than the Origin one, and full of tourists. Real Stormwalls! They are seriously amazing. Got back on land and things started to get real weird. First off, some people full on ran into me. Red flag numero uno. Didn't even notice the Crusader security. Second red flag. Then in the middle of my food selfie, some randoms burst in and start shooting. Friends, this may be my last. Stay tuned for my next post to see if I survive.
Behold, the Devil's Roundabout. These 15 kilometers of nasty comprise a rancorous racecourse known to push pilots to the limits of technical capability. We're out here at MISC's official IAE event, gearing up for a demo that's, shall we say, prohibited by Microtech's speed limits. Can their speedy razor tame this beast of a course? Jimmy is about to find out. I'd do it, Jim. But it's an insurance thing.
What did you think about previous QA videos?
Yeah, it's been really cool, and like it's been nice that the user have been able to highlight what QA does.
Have you ever looked at the comments or anything?
I think the comments were a bit interesting, to say the least.
Are you saying people don't like QA videos?
I'm not saying that.
Some do, some would, for sure, yeah.
Do you think people like this video?
I hope so. I hope they enjoy the upcoming content that's coming. It's been a long road to 318, but I'm sure people are really going to enjoy all the new content that's coming.
The difference between embedded QA and general QA is that we work closely with the development teams.
We provide direct feedback to locations and features that they are working on.
So for me, that's the lighting team and the interactables team.
I work hand in hand with the various different content teams, so Sandbox 1, 2, EUL1, EUL2.
You know, because the lighting team's kind of one of the teams that work on things right at the end. It's usually the case where I'm kind of jumping on a location just before the rest of the QA department hop on it.
We look out for specifically art-related issues. That could be things like missing materials, replace me textures. With a normal QA, they would have to put in a bug report, it gets sent off to production, and they send it over to the appropriate artist or designer. Whereas for me, I'm essentially cutting out the middleman. I can just directly go to a developer or an artist or designer and say, hey, I've noticed this issue, is this intended? Or just giving them real-time feedback and bugs.
The idea is that we find and iron out any of the issues before it is delivered directly to the QA department, so they can then get it out to the the backers and the wider public.
Right now I'm working on the IAE halls. The Drake Interplanetary are kind of taken hold this year. They're running the show. Theme-wise, it's very different. That's not just sort of simple color changes, it's kind of the overall feel of the event. The floor layouts have also changed, so the lights that are going to be lighting up the ships are going to be all different. Basically, I need to make sure that, well, the events aren't dark to begin with, lighting the ships on display correctly, the various environment probes around the area are reacting correctly to their environment, color grades working correctly, you know, the atmospheric fog that's placed in the area by the team is present and reacting to lights properly. I think the lighting team have done a great job. I think the environment teams in general have done a great job, but because I sort of am speaking for the lighting team, I really like what they've done. Yeah, looks awesome.
Because we've had a bit extra time, we've been able to actually bring out these outposts. They weren't initially meant to come out for 3.18. When 3.17 came out, we had just initially 5 derelict outposts on Microtech, but now we're timesing that by 7, so when 3.18 rolls out, there should be 35 derelict outposts, 10 on Microtech, 10 on Hurston, and between 1 to 6 on various different moons throughout the Stanton system. Well, the players can go through and explore the environment. They can look for loot boxes, so they can get a munch or maybe find a multi-tool or just things that they could sell at kiosks. There are also delivery missions as well, similar to the ones that you've seen in 3.17, where the players will go to a derelict outpost, which is occupied by 9 tails, take them out, get the delivery box, and deliver it to wherever it needs to go. So some of the issues that we've seen so far with the derelict outpost are related to AI. As you might have seen in CitizenCon, there have been some updates to the combat AI, and it's kind of slowly making its way into the PU. So there's a few little teething issues there just to make sure that the AI are actually working correctly within the derelict outpost on the planets and hopefully not walking into walls. Because 3.18 is got a lot of content coming, with say like PES, for instance, it has been a bit more of a challenging release, just because obviously the new issues that are coming up because of PES, but I think that the teams are tackling it as quickly as they possibly can. We're thankful that we're getting the extra time to kind of really flesh it out and make sure that it's a quality release for the players.
Currently, I am working on the new rest stop stations that are going to be found in the Pyro system once we release that in the upcoming 4.0 patch. Because these stations are lawless and there's going to be no like green zones to govern your behavior on the stations, we're going over it just to make sure that the locations are fun for the backers to engage in combat. So we've been covering stuff like sniping spots, combat routes, balance against facing AI, also identifying potential issues with the environment that might hinder the gameplay experience, such as potential issues with lighting and fog, potential bottlenecks and choke points in the station layout that might cause problems for players and end up getting bottlenecked by another hostile group. We found some issues with some of the environmental puzzles currently. There's a bit of desync. If I was to disable, say, an electronic trap, it would not show up for the other player. So we've been working, like getting some debug and stuff to make sure that the devs are fully aware of what the issue is and they can rectify this before a wider release. There's a dramatic difference between these stations and the ones that are found in the Stanton system. They're very dark and oppressive in nature, very run down, and they offer a lot more gameplay opportunities for players and also a lot more possibilities and overall experience that the current rest stops just are not capable to cater to.
What I want to try to emphasize to the community is just how important and respected QA is within CIG. We're constantly looking out for issues and ensuring that the quality of the game is as high a standard as possible.
Once we've been through a stretch and we've got a new patch out to see how the backers are responding to the new content and to see how they're enjoying it, it's always a highlight to see just how many people enjoy what we're doing.
I'm sure there's people out there, some of our backers that would want to get into this industry, and the QA is a good
Entry-level position.
entry-level position. Yeah,
Look right into this camera and say, we're hiring.
we're hiring.
That's it.
Quality assurance teams are an essential element of any video games development, and embedding them right there into the pits next to the designers, next to the artists, next to the programmers allows for a synchronicity of purpose and an acknowledgement of necessity that's been a hallmark of Star Citizen's development for years. And while technical teams continue to put Alpha 3.18 through its paces ahead of its now scheduled December release, the delay from its original publish has provided a number of limited opportunities to content teams to afford them chances they might not otherwise have been able to utilize. And for members of the EU Sandbox 1 team, that means getting to continue an initiative started earlier this year to research community-created racetracks in the Stanton system and find new ways to incorporate them officially into the very fabric of the persistent universe.
So the yellow racetrack was taken inspiration from one of the racetracks built by the community, which was the Grim Prospects racetrack on the Star Citizen Racing Discord, I believe. So there are some on there that are exact. We've taken, direct copies of those tracks, but the yellow one is a little bit different because we've moved it slightly away from Grimhex into an adjacent asteroid field. So our designer in DE, Antoine Fauville, he's taken, a course and he's made it for the players to play. I think it's just really nice to have more space POIs. We have, attractions like Grimhex, but we need more in the surrounding vicinity. So, it might be a case of where you're just flying through the asteroid ring in yellow, trying to get to the planet's surface, and you come across something like this. And we've really built up the structures with refinery modules and cargo modules that we've used before. So it's a nice point of interest, and also it looks cool. We're using lots of the natural formations of the rocks themselves and also asteroid tethers and stuff like that are already in the game. Those are our natural checkpoints for the race. I think it's really cool that we have a community that we can take inspiration from and build something of our own. As much as we play test, as much as we spend time in the engine, the players are the ones who are spending hours and hours refining their skills and thinking of new activities to do. So for example, with the Grim Prospects racetrack, it was quite bare, they were just racing around a pre-memorized route, going around all of these asteroids. But now we can really delineate that race and, we can art it up and make it look pretty as well, so people have more memorable moments to talk about.
From Yila, named for the oldest of three siblings featured in the now classic 24th century children's morality tale, A Gift for Baba, which you can read in its entirety on the robertsspaceindustries.com website, shout out to the narrative team, we move to Turpy, named for the ancient Greek muse of music, the smallest and perhaps most barren of Microtech's 3 moons.
What I'm currently working on now is the racing track on Utopia. It's called Icebreaker. I believe it was actually from the community originally. And what we did is we took that initial bare-bone structure and we basically created, using the Microtech prefabs and assets, is we actually created like a little research facility base. We've kept the path as close as we could to the initial community racetrack, but what we've done is we've added bits of flavour in from structures to fly past, structures to fly under, and then we've done a bit of a lighting pass to kind of help navigate the player around the space, but without feeling like the intention beforehand was meant to be for racing. It was meant to be this kind of large open front sea kind of facility with like long struts coming out and kind of good. There's good vantage points as well for like when the players come together, that we have little landing pad spots that where, you know, you could, you know, group up, get together, you could watch the, you know, your teammates flying around, you know, trying to beat one another kind of competitively. On Utopia, there's not actually tons of POIs. And I think, to be honest, this new space, this new location is going to be one of the key locations on this moon.
Your first mistake wasn't your last mistake. All the things you say, lies that infiltrated my bed, and I believed them. Nothing left. But the heart it rules the head. You've been gone for so long, my heart breaks, but I can't get enough. 'Cause the taste of you is bittersweet. In a world of make-believe, denying everything we don't wanna see. 'Cause the taste of you is bittersweet. Now the storm's past, I can see clearly, even though you don't hear me. You haunt me in my dreams, but I'm waking up. I found a way to breathe. You've been gone for so long, my heart breaks, but I can't get enough. 'Cause the taste of you is bittersweet. In a world of make-believe, denying everything we don't wanna see.
Make up only
'Cause the taste
a third of the community creations being canonized in the upcoming Alpha 318. And we're going to be showcasing even more being created by our partners at Turbulent on tomorrow's Star Citizen Live. But before we leave the topic this week, here's a brief visual teaser of EU Sandbox 1's third track this patch, On the Surface of ArcCorp on the outskirts of Area 18. So what did we learn this week? Well, we learned that like the developers sitting beside them, embedded QA are often found working on patches for next week, next month, and next year all at the same time. that the number of outposts and racetracks in the stand system are expected to explode in the upcoming Alpha 3.18, and that we're always going to look to the community for inspiration when it comes time to add additional content to the persistent universe. Now, don't forget that tomorrow we'll be talking with our friends at Turbulent about even more community racetracks coming online in Alpha 3.18. And then, of course, next week is the start of our annual Intergalactic Aerospace Expo 2952, where almost every single ship and vehicle in the Star Citizen universe gets its moment to shine. You can learn all about it up on the robertsspaceindustries.com website. For Inside Star Citizen, I'm Jared Huckabee, and we'll see you all here next week.
The concept of server, which has been ingrained since the beginning, has changed to become a mesh of servers.
So how do we solve this? The answer should be simple. Hi, my name is Paul Reindl and I'm the Director for Online Technology here at CAG. I wanted to take this year's CitizenCon as an opportunity to give you some insight into our exciting persistent streaming and server meshing technology. In this talk, I will cover a quick overview of the current streaming and server architecture and how we plan to transform the existing tech into what we call persistent streaming and server meshing. I also have Benoit Beauséjour with me, who later in the talk will give you more insight into the graph database that is powering persistent streaming. Hey Ben, how's it going?
Hi Paul, hi everybody. I'm super excited to share some of the details about what the game services team at Turbulent has been working on to support the efforts to build this technology and make it a reality for you guys.
Cool, let's get started. Before we look into persistent streaming and server meshing and how this new technology will work, let's have a brief look at entity streaming and how our solar system is set up. Each solar system can be seen as one giant level, containing every single object inside the solar system. From the sun to the Ventura rock, standing as one large map. Since this is a lot of data, the setup is split up into a hierarchy of nested object containers, which can be streamed in and out individually. If you look at an abstract view of Stanton, it all starts with one solar system root object container. This object container contains the sun, the planets, and the moons around each planet. Each of those locations then has its own object container, and if you take a closer look at a moon, you will find the entities placed around the moon inside this object container. For example, a space station orbiting the moon. This setup keeps repeating. The space station could be set up via multiple rooms, each defined by its own object container. Additionally to the static hierarchy of object containers, there are also all the dynamic entities which bring the universe to life. NPCs, an interactive vending machine, and of course players and spaceships. Most of these entities are made of a hierarchy as well. For example, a player has his body, an undersuit, and armor attached to it, and they are all child entities of the player. The streaming system treats these mini hierarchies as streaming groups to make sure that an object like a spaceship is always streamed in as one unit. Loading the entirety of Stanton into memory and simulating every single entity would be very expensive, especially on the client, but also on a single server. That's why we developed entity bind culling and object container streaming, which allows us to stream object containers and streaming groups individually. When the game server starts, all entities and object containers within the solar system are loaded into local memory of that game server. These entities are not streamed in, we just store the initial state in server memory. When a player connects, we create a so-called streaming bubble around that player, and object containers as well as streaming groups that are visible from the player's point of view are considered inside this bubble. Any object container that is inside the bubble will stream its content, and any streaming group within the bubble will also be streamed in on the server and then replicated to the client. Entities are considered inside the streaming bubble if their projected screen size on a virtual 1080p plane is larger than 5 pixels based on distance to the player. So while a large object like a moon will be considered inside the bubble from far away, a small object like a ship will only be considered inside when it's much closer to the player. When the player starts moving across the universe, entities that leave the streaming bubble will become unbound, and the replication layer will remove these entities from the client. Entities that enter the streaming bubble will get bound to the client, which caused the network layer to replicate these entities to the client, effectively streaming them in. We call this technique entity bind culling because streaming on the client is driven by the network layer, binding and unbinding entities. If entities are not in any client streaming bubble, so no players in their vicinity, these entities are also streamed out on the server. They go back into a dormant state where they are not simulated. This model works quite well on the client, however it doesn't scale well on the server. While we do stream entities on the server with no players close to them, a poor distribution of players will cause the DGS to load most entities, and the more clients we try to match to a given game server, the likelihood of a player being at every single location increases. And that basically nullifies the benefit of server-side streaming. So how do we solve this? The answer should be simple. Allow multiple instances of the game server to work together so they can split up the work. Well, it's not quite that simple. Let's have a look at the current architecture. As of today, we have a traditional client-server architecture. One instance of a dedicated game server serves up to 50 clients. This is called instance, as the dedicated game server has its own instance view of the persistent universe. Once the server is full, we start a new server instance, which then serves additional 50 players. As we've seen before, when a DGS instance is created, it loads a unique version of the Stantum system into its local server's memory. Therefore, each dedicated game server instance has a unique copy of every single object that's part of Stanton. As these entities only exist in the memory of the game server when the instance is shut down, these entities are deleted. The goal of server meshing is to allow multiple DGS instances to work together and divide simulation costs between each server in the mesh. In the best case, we can scale this to infinity by adding more nodes to the mesh. As we saw earlier, each server node stores the state of entities locally. If we want to mesh these servers together, we need to find an efficient way to synchronize state between each server. With our current architecture, depending on the vision of the simulation and the overlap, this would require a lot of synchronization points between each node. It's an exponential problem, as in the worst case, each node would need to talk to each other node in the mesh, severely limiting our ability to scale it. To solve this issue, we are separating simulation and replication. Instead of just meshing multiple dedicated game servers together and have them synchronize state between each other, we are introducing a new layer called replication layer. The replication layer has two major functions. It holds the state of every entity in memory and replicates the state to clients, but also to server nodes. I said server nodes because in this setup, the traditional dedicated game server becomes a game server node. This server node connects to the replication layer, very similar to a client, and only a subset of entities are replicated to that server node. Replication to server nodes is controlled by the network bind culling algorithm that we saw earlier, and is driven by streaming bubbles, and it works very similar to how it works on clients. The server node has certain streaming bubbles assigned to it, which will cause the replication layer to replicate entities from these streaming bubbles to the server node. Contrary to a player's client, a server node has the additional responsibility to execute server-side authoritative code for those entities, controlling AI, doing damage calculations, etc., etc. The result of this simulation is then written back from the server node to the replication layer, and from there it is replicated to all connected clients and other server nodes. Since streaming bubbles can overlap, entities may be replicated to multiple server nodes, exactly the same way how they are currently replicated to multiple clients if players are at the same location. To avoid two server nodes trying to simulate the same entity, only one server node can have authority over any given entity. And only that server is allowed to write entity state back to the replication layer. This is usually the first server node who replicated the entity, and other server nodes will only run client code on those entities. Basically, you can see a game server node as a client with authority to write the result of its local simulation back to the replication layer. Authority can transfer between server nodes. For example, if an entity leaves the streaming bubble of the current authoritative server, It is then transferred to the next server node that has this entity currently streamed in. Further authority can be transferred between server nodes on demand in order to load balance the mesh. Since we now mesh multiple server instances together to simulate a shared state of the universe, we no longer call this instance, but instead we call it shard. A shard is still a unique version of the universe, and we still have multiple shards running in parallel. However, the server mesh will lift our current hard limit of 50 players, and it will enable us to steadily increase the number of players we can support within one shard. It will take some time, and in our first version of server meshing, we will still have a very similar situation as we have today, with quite a few shards running in parallel. However, this technology is going to enable us to start scaling the universe to become a true MMO experience. There are some fundamental differences between a shard and an instance, and for this we need to take a closer look at the replication layer and talk a little bit about persistent streaming. Previously, the entity state was held entirely in memory on the dedicated game server. And besides some selected persistent player items, all that state would be lost when the servers shut down or crashed. The replication layer is fundamentally different, as the entire state of the universe is stored within a graph database. We call this entity graph, and it's an evolution of the original iCache. When we create a new shard, the initial entity state of the universe is seeded into this database. This happens offline before we let player join the shard. When the shard comes online, the replication mesh caches the state from the entity graph. As players connect to the shard and as we start to spin up new server nodes, simulation begins and alters the state of the universe. The replication layer does not only replicate these state changes to connect players and server nodes, it also replicates the state into the entity graph. Since the entity graph is a persistent database, the state of the shard is never lost, and even if the shard is shut down, the state persists and can be resumed at a later time. Benoit is going to show you some more technical details about the entity graph.
Thank you, Paul. Get ready for a deep dive into the entity graph persistence database. The entity graph is our approach to persisting the game world. This is fundamentally different to what is happening today in the game, where only items you own are actually stored. Our objective is to be able to save the state of the replication layer, which includes all entities in a given universe shard, in order to provide a truly persistent world, where actions you take as a player can influence environments in the game world permanently. The entity graph, as the name implies, stores game data as a graph. This representation is native for the game engine because it is how internally those data structures the game uses are addressed and manipulated. Using a graph also has several advantages. We're basically storing and retrieving from a gigantic indexed list of nodes and edges, and those edges between those nodes are optimized in a sharded database. But in order to properly explain the system, we must first view the game world as the game engine sees it. Game objects are constructed of several game entities linked together in a hierarchical structure. You can picture this as a tree, which is a specialized kind of graph. This is how the game engine holds and simulates the elements on screen as it is running the simulation. In a server meshing world, this is also how replicants hold the entities in memory for each of their assigned territories. For example, a ship is made up of several entities that make up different parts of the entire playable vehicle. Each part is parented to another entity until the root of the ship is reached. Each of these entity nodes holds properties with regard to what the entity represents in the game. The class of object it is, the item type, its legal owner, orientation, and of course its very precise physical location within the game world. Each edge in our graph qualifies the relationship to the parent. In the case of a vehicle, our edges store properties that tell the system which port is being used to attach the entity into the parent and what kind of attachment it is. An item port attachment, a zone attachment, many others. In a constellation, for example, the different major sections of the hull are entity nodes with edges to the ship root. We call this small graph of item an aggregate because it is a whole movable unit. The ship root in this case is called the aggregate root because it sits at the top of a logical object. You can think of what you normally call an item as an aggregate, with the aggregate root being the actual item you are talking about. For example, a first-person weapon with attached scope, mag clips, and laser sights is a small hierarchy of entities. We distinguish the aggregate routes from other nodes by giving it a label. Labels allow us to distinguish and rapidly look up and find nodes of a specific type, either when we retrieve parts of the graph or when we look up specific nodes. Those labels exist to allow correct reversal of the graph data when we query for specific things in the game world. Other labels include streaming groups, universe root, star system root. This allows us to really look up and index those types. But the tree depth doesn't stop there. Additional information is required for a fully functional ship. The insides of each of those structural entities have to be fleshed out. Object containers are the building blocks of how space division is achieved, which aggregates and what part of the hierarchy they're in. In fact, most major areas of ships are represented as OC entities attached to the ship root or another OC. The shape of this data actually takes in reality is driven by designers. Of course, then, each of those object containers also contain entity hierarchies as well, expanding to have the common static and dynamic entities you're used to playing with, like elevators, beds, guns, seats, gimbals, and others. In addition to object containers that make up the structure of the ship, other aggregates can also be attached within the hierarchy of our ship. For example, a rover parked in the cargo bay of our Connie will be attached as a sub-aggregate attached to your ship's cargo grid. Same goes for turrets, which are changeable and themselves expose item ports, allowing guns to be mounted. For each of those entity nodes, a snapshot document is also stored. This document contains all the runtime values, the game components attached to those entities. This data is the dynamic part of the model where game developers can persist variables on any entity in the game world according to the rules of a game component. For example, damage state and health data are stored within the snapshot document of those ship entities. Storing and retrieving data in graph form really have some awesome properties. It's a native structure to the game engine, so it gets loaded rapidly. It's very simple and effective to serialize and transport because it's just a list of nodes and edges. There are optimized databases that we can use that allow us to fetch entities recursively in a traversal rapidly, and the data set can be sharded across multiple database instances reliably. One key element here and one big advantage of having a graph data is also that we can reduce writes. So in order to reduce that, all the hierarchical changes that we need to do can be minimized. For example, if we want to detach mutation command will detach an entity from the hierarchy. In this case, a single edge must be erased, which is a very inexpensive operation. A nice side effect of this is also that it's the same operation whether we're detaching a single entity or an entire aggregate. In both cases, the single edge must be erased in order to perform the detach. Rolling away in your stowed rover, detaching a gun from a replacement or for a replacement, or selling a turret becomes really a cheap operation to persist. That is good because that happens very frequently. Compared to a columnar approach where index columns must be maintained for every write, linking all objects to the aggregate root, this is really a great performance improvement. The same properties apply with the attach command, which will only have to create a single edge when rejoining items to the hierarchy, be it via attachment or parking another vehicle on a docking hub. The attach and detach commands are two of the many semantic commands that the Entity Graph API proposes, allowing to express a mutation to the graph. Other examples of the different commands are create, possess, transfer, stack, unstack, change location, change snapshot, bury, stow, and unstow. One important change and addition that comes about with the entity graph is also how mutations are applied to the database. Each mutation is composed of multiple commands which are executed in sequence but committed transactionally to the database. They either succeed together or fail and roll back together. This ensures that the changes to the graph are always consistent and no lost writes or errors can cause data corruption. For example, a mutation consisting of detach, transfer, and an attach commands would succeed only if all three commands are applied successfully. The system retrieves a constant ordered streams of mutation from the replicant scribes that are part of the replication layer and are enqueued in durable queues to ensure that no message is lost even if the service is unavailable or paused. It's important to understand that the graph does not only cover your ships and items, but the entire game world is made of this way. Your ship is actually attached to the zone host location you travel in. Your playing character is attached to your ship seat when you are piloting it, just like planets are attached to their star system routes. The game world, though, must exist in persistence before it can be replicated and mutated. This is part of a process called seeding, where a new database is created by the replication layer. It is during that process that millions of entities are initially created in a sort of a big bang. At this stage, every object container, every minor or major entity from planets to doorknobs are inserted into the entity graph in their default state. That is, the state that the designers decided was the initial state of the world. This process goes down from the universe root to the star system root, and into the different areas and planets, into their landing zone, their buildings, their rooms, down to the smallest possible entity. There are multiple types of entities that are created during this process. First are unstreamable entities, which make up the skeleton of the universe. Those are entities you do not get to see, but are part of and always present on every worker node in the mesh. It is by looking up unstreamable entities that the game world is able to stream in the other types of entities into your client and into the server mesh. It is from those entities that others' entities bloom. Static entities make up the game world that you cannot interact with. Most map objects that make up buildings like the Hurston Tower, rooms and walls of hospitals, or the bar at G-Lock are all made up of static entities. And the last type is dynamic entities. These are entities that you as a player can manipulate. A bottle on a bar, a door in a level, a ship component, everything you interact with when you're playing the game. Of course, during seeding, all object containers are also seeded as part of this hierarchy and inform the shape of the loadable subgraphs. The seeding process takes a couple minutes to complete. Once created, this newly seeded database represents a full dimension of the universe and will now persist as it is modified by players. As you play the game and go about with your ship, your playing character entity moves from location to location, getting attached to new zones as you travel. Your player aggregate is itself part of the Jang graph, and your location and state are persisted by the replication layer scribes to the entity graph of your given territory. When you interact with dynamic objects and their properties change, the state of that entity will not persist until this instance of the database is undeployed. There are, in fact, multiple copies of the universe that are seeded at a given time. We call those shards. Each shard is a unique copy of the game world, complete with all of its entities and unique states. Think of it as an alternate universe. Dynamic entities that have been modified in each dimension will have different states. The bottle on the bar was moved, or the door was destroyed, might not be in the same state between shards. This technique is a way to gain scalability as our player base grows. A single shard can grow to host multiple millions of entities. Even if each shard database is itself clustered and can grow substantially past a single machine, there is a point where multiple clusters are needed. As you join the persistent universe, the matchmaking system is getting retooled in order to select the correct universe shard for you to play on, using multiple data points like your friend's location, your active party, your last game session, or which shards still have items on it that you own. This is to ensure as much as possible that you end up on the same shard you expect to be as a player. In order to provide a seamless game experience, it would be terrible if you lost items you used when you were in a given shard versus another, or if your character was bound to a shard forever. To alleviate this, the system includes the concept of stowed and unstowed entities. An item is considered unstowed when it is currently active in a shard database and being actively simulated on by the worker nodes of the replication layer. Stowed entities are player-owned entities that are stowed in inventory containers or location inventories. Those entities live in another database entirely, called the global database, a large clustered database that spans all shards. Aggregate roots in that shard are stored and linked with edges to inventory nodes. Any entity in a shard can have an inventory node in global for stowing things in it. For example, a box entity that is unstowed in a shard would have an inventory node in the global database to store its.
Cause a taste of you is bittersweet. taste of you is bittersweet.
Liberty, ingenuity, equality. These ideals connect each and every one of us across this vast empire of stars. As such, I want you all to meet the 2952 Cutter from Drake Interplanetary. Oh yeah. This ship embodies those ideals that we are truly democratizing spaceflight.
Who needs to hire talent when the aerospace CEOs are dying to get on camera? Hey, Jimmy?
It's all about the hard-working people of the UEE. That's why we're excited to sponsor the Intergalactic Aerospace Expo 2952. See you in STEM.
What in the unholy hell? They think I'm dead? Unbelievable! Bob! I cannot believe that they moved on without me. After everything I did for them, would a call have killed them? Oh, hey, Jax, do you want to come back, host the show? I'm sorry, Jax can't take your call because he's dead. Bob! Bob, now, I need to take the Corsair.
Good one.
Now, I came out here to get inspired, and I've just been hanging around, tending to my garden, and pillaging and plundering with you lot.
Are you talking to me?
You don't understand, Bob. My bosses have killed me off screen. I've got to get back to Stanton. Is this ship flight ready?
Whoa! Whoa, Jax! But you can't have my ship.
Oh, come on, Bob, you owe me. You stole my Odyssey right when I got to Pyro.
But you stole it back.
And crashed it.
And crashed it.
Fair point. Did the boys already chop that new Drake cutter?
I told you I'm keeping that one. I kind of like it.
Non-shard specific database while keeping the live aggregate within the shard. As you transition between shards, your playing character gets unstowed into the selected shard. This process effectively moves your player aggregate data from the global database to the shard database. Your player entity now gets simulated by game worker nodes and is being updated at a regular rate as you play and move around the game world. Accessing items that are stowed, like a ship, from the ASOP terminal is basically reading the inventory contents of the global graph at your location. Same goes for personal inventories or cargo inventories. When you request a ship to be spawned, the system will unstow the ship onto a landing pad by submitting a shard mutation. Alternatively, when a ship gets despawned during parking at a rest stop, the ship gets stowed back into the global database, making it available for unstow in any shard. The global database is where all of your stowed items will live. Hero items will always be available for unstow in any shard if they are not already in use. The process of stowing and unstowing also helps to alleviate problems related to entity authority so that only game worker nodes in the right shard can update unstowed entities in that shard. This brings about a nice property of the server meshing and persistent streaming architecture in that the state of the entities are being persisted transactionally during play, be it in a shard or a global database through stowing. A single server crash, or 30K, should no longer result in item loss. This model also has a real scalability benefit that stems from the separation of the read-intensive workloads that are isolated to the global DB from the write-intensive workloads that are handled by the individual shard database. The global graph exists to provide seamless access to your belongings no matter what shard or alternate universe you're currently playing in. Okay, let's go back to Paul to learn about some of the benefits of the server meshing architecture.
Yeah, the first benefit is obviously the advantage that we don't have this issue of synchronization between different server nodes. Each server node has one single connection to the replication layer, which is used to push and get updates for entities of interest. The second advantage is that the same streaming and replication logic that we already use for clients can be applied to servers, and that server nodes will only stream in a small area, which will greatly increase performance. It also allows us to increase resilience down the road. As long as a client is connected to the replication layer, the client stays connected even if the server node crashes. In this case, the simulation for an entity may be stopped for a moment, but as soon as a new server comes online, the simulation will just continue. While the underlying tech is close to completion, there are some upcoming challenges that we need to solve before we can give that into your hands. The first version of this technology will contain a static server mesh. Instead of the fully dynamic mesh that we saw earlier, the static mesh assigns server nodes to predefined sections of the solar system. This will reduce the amount of authority transfer that game code has to address in this first release. There will also be a lot of challenges for the game services and game feature teams. Or maybe Benoit can give a little bit more.
Yeah, there are many parts of the game that are affected by this new server meshing architecture. So any gameplay features that has to rely on the concept of a server, right? Currently, when you connect to a game server, we know what match you're in. So to send messages and update to that server, we simply locate your active match and then send those messages out there. That concept needs to change because we now have a mesh to deal with. And so there are multiple game servers that need to receive this information. They need to be able to subscribe dynamically to it or unsubscribe dynamically to players transitioning through them. So you can imagine that this will affect things like missions that currently are spawned locally on the game server. These now need to be spawned globally within the shard and also persist their state. So all services that are attached to missions, whether it's the quantum system in the back end or the quasar tools, need to now know about the concept of a shard. This also goes deep into like things that are mechanical, like getting global chat to work on a server. That concept now needs to be extended to the shard, where this will probably push us to implement this as a location-based chat, for example. And so many teams in the company now need to change their feature to take into account the meshing technology that's behind it, because the concept of server, which has been ingrained since the beginning, has changed to become a mesh of servers.
Yeah, exactly. So I also want to shout out to the network team who's working on the replication layer and the bind culling, as well as the persistent tech team who's working on the entity and object container streaming. And as Benoit said, also all the other teams that work on gameplay features or gameplay services that are affected by this new technology. There are a lot of devs working on this, and we are very excited to push on this new technology. Thank you for your time.
It's the morning. Before things get started, people are still asleep in their beds. The beginning of day 2. We've never done a day 2 before. But the glamorous hosting life out front is nothing compared to the draining and exhausting life behind the scenes. Let's take a tour of the production area when nobody's here and nothing is working, including my voice.
Do I have to crouch? I can't see where my head's at. When I talk to me just now? Hi, everybody. Welcome to Inside Star Citizen. For years, we have wanted to do a true behind-the-scenes look at the making of CitizenCon. We've never been able to do it, but now, thanks to the lovely assistance of Tom and David. Say hello, Tom and David.
Hello, Tom and David.
We are here at the LA Convention Center, and it is Wednesday, October 18th. It's about 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and we're going to take a look at the progress, or rather lack thereof, these things really do come together in the last minute, of the LA Convention Center. So let's go inside and take a look. We are here at the big lobby. You might recognize this from all those videos you've watched before. We're heading into West Hall, which is Petrie Hall. That's the hall that we are inhabiting this week. We are here inside Hall A. This is an awfully big room. This is where the main stage will be, and the roughly 3,000 people that are in attendance to watch CitizenCon, all the presentations, the stuff that we've been working very hard on for the last several months. We are here in Hall B. This is where the main action of CitizenCon comes. This is where the community booths, the Pyro Playground, the Dragonfly, the Atmo Esports. Obviously, we're going to check in here in a little bit as more progresses. I'm running out of gas. So this is the part you never see. This is the Pyro Playground before the Pyro Playground. This is the room where we set up all 150 computers, plus quite a few spares and quite a few alternates. This is a massive undertaking for the first playable Pyro here at CitizenCon. These are the true heroes, the people from IT and the people from player experience.
Who are you? What are you doing? I'm IT systems engineer here at Cloud Appearing Games, and I am setting up the Pyro Playground, helping Ahmed with the servers.
Hi, Ahmed.
From my perspective, it's been pretty smooth sailing. I'm sure Miles' team has had a few surprises they've had to deal with. I'm sure Ahmed has had a few bumps as well, but other than that, we're smooth along pretty well.
This is where we call the command center. Command center is where all the actual important people who put this stuff together, Leah, Tyler, all them, that's where they kind of hold out and they address all the different issues that come up throughout the day. We're not allowed in there because there's some people who don't like to be on video. And so we're going to respect their privacy. But imagine a big room with tables and chairs and lots of laptops. You've seen it. We'll see if we can't bring some people out and have them tell you about what they're doing.
I'm Jake. I'm a community manager for Star Citizen and Squadron 42.
We are here at the Los Angeles Convention Center for CitizenCon 2953, the first in-person CitizenCon since 2019.
It's exciting, honestly, and I can't wait to see what it looks like in a few more days.
I think it's going to be double in size of what we had before, so this is going to be super amazing.
But today's the first day where we're kind of all in the convention hall, putting everything together, and just seeing this stuff come to life is very, very cool so far.
Construction has begun, so it's we're starting to see things take shape, which is really exciting.
It feels crazy to walk in there and see how massive the space is when you first walk in there. It's very echoey, it's very big. So during CitizenCon, I'm actually the interstitial host of the Twitch stream. So my co-host is Jared. He's fine. You know, his writer is really intense. You know, like the single trailer just filled with beef sticks is a little much, but like, you know, it's Jared, we let him be.
So it's day 2 of setup. We're starting to recognize the things that we've only seen in concepts leading up to the big show. And so I think it's just super exciting for everybody to see it all finally coming to life. So I'm part of the core event leadership team that's been planning this event for many, many, many months. And I can't tell you just how rewarding it is to see everything coming to life. I think for a lot of us, we're just as excited, if not more, than the attendees for CitizenCon.
We've had a number of technical issues. Not uncommon to a big event like this. The severe power issue that took about 6 hours to track down, which we finally resolved, but it set us behind. So we're now just going to test our first content on the screen. I believe we're going to start with Graham.
Audio can play a crucial role in the immersion.
Graham is the only pre-recorded video, so he'll be a good test for sync because we're going to see.
No.
But it's just sitting there.
You know what, Jax? Fine. If it'll keep you out of trouble for a while, you can borrow the cutter.
Thank you, Bob.
I said borrow.
Thanks, Bob.
Jax!
Bye.
Don't fly angry!
Right. Are we on? Ah, okay, right. Jax McCleary here. Obviously, I'm not dead. Just thought you should know. Looks like we're going back to Stanton. Here we go! Okay. Ah, throttle's over here. Interesting. That does make a little bit more sense. Okay. Here we go.
My name is Michael Smith, also known as Bayor. I'm the director of the player experience team, and we are setting up the Pyro Playground right now. This one room, which is one of two rooms, is bigger than I think we've ever done with CitizenCon. We have 150 computers behind me, complete with all their mice and keyboards. 10 of those are set up with some VKB peripherals, left and a right stick. We also have Tobii eye trackers on 100 of the PCs.
It's allowing people to try it out if they haven't already, and they're able to experience, increased immersion in Star Citizen.
I'm sort of responsible to make sure that the demo that the players get to experience here is playable, it's fun, that it transitions pretty smoothly for each of the little sessions they get to play, and just understanding that gameplay experience.
We're here in the LA Convention Center. It's chaos, as always, but good chaos. In 2018, we built a full-size Dragonfly for Austin CitizenCon. Chris Law from the ship team has done a whole new skin. The Dragonfly initially took 3 months to build. It's taken 4 or 5 days to repaint it, and it'll take us about 3 hours to put it back together. We built the Dragonfly for you guys to actually come and sit on. It's a great photo op. If you're here at CitizenCon in the flesh, you can come on, 1 or 2 people can sit on it, as inverse, forward, backwards, whatever you like. So you can come here, get a photo, memories forever.
Okay. I'm gonna be a TikTok star. Ready, go. Drake.
As we walked in for the first time today, we could see our 30-foot banner. Atmo is actually here to bring a live tournament experience to CitizenCon. We're very excited. This has been 6 very hard years from the demo rally to Atmo Esports to actually come for the first time at the CitizenCon and put together a live tournament experience, not only for the fans, but for the competitors and the creators that are going to be competing. And I know when they come here, they're also going to be pretty impressed with what we've done to put together here.
You know, for me, it's been 4 long years without us being able to connect with our community in person. And I really can't stress just how much it means to us to be able to spend time with our audience in person. I think with any live event, and we've done a lot of these Citizen Cons, there's always fires that have to be put out. Comparatively, though, things are going pretty smooth this year. And I'm probably going to regret saying that in like 15 minutes when one of these walls falls over on me.
When we're coming together in events like this, we can actually, connect faces and handles, and it's kind of like coming together as a family again.
Being able to put faces to a lot of the names that I interact with on a day-to-day basis, I think honestly is the biggest thing that I'm looking forward to the most.
Being able to talk to backers and people who played the game directly was amazing.
It was super rewarding, just the conversations that I had with a lot of our backers, both at the event and also the kind of after party.
Hall B was really cool. I remember first seeing it on the Friday morning before it was even finished and just being so impressed with all the dressing in there.
There's so much cool stuff to show. I want to make sure it all gets to be shown. And so that's my biggest worry, is that we're not going to have time to show all the cool stuff.
There was like a meet and greet area, the esports stuff was there. It was quite cozy, which was a nice feeling.
First moment on stage, kind of sank in a little bit of how large an event it was going to be.
Once you actually get ready to go on stage for real, that's when the nerves kick in.
Being the only person on stage with that many eyes on you was very new and very scary.
Hello everyone, I'm Will Hain. I'm here to talk about water in Star Engine.
I was having a good time, but watching it back, I'm talking really fast.
We were excited, the crowd seemed to be buzzing from what we were showing, and yeah, just lots of positive energy, I think.
We got a lot of positive feedback from the crowd, there's a lot of big cheers.
It was, in a way, all this build-up and then it was over.
It kind of was a bit of a blur.
Then obviously a huge sense of relief once I was actually done.
Seems to have been well received, which has been really great.
I'd definitely do it again, for sure.
Hi everybody!
Welcome everyone to Citizen Con 2953.
It works!
Phone? You go ahead, phone. Phone, can you keep zooming in?
Thank you for joining us for Citizen Con. Come back tomorrow. We are here with members of the vehicle team.
We've been working on this for so long, and seeing the reactions of people in the auditorium is going to be something that I'm going to carry with me, probably for the rest of my life.
Thank you guys very, very much.
That's a little bit about the behind the scenes of CitizenCon, how that gets put together. So I hope you enjoyed it. We'll be back with normal shows next week. So from CitizenCon on the show floor, while everybody else is cleaning up and I'm doing this, this is Jared Huckabee saying thanks for watching. And I was going to say see you in the verse, but that was the old show. Oh, thanks for letting us share the process of game development with you. We'll see y'all here next week. Forgot my catchphrase. Yeah.
Please welcome Persistent Universe Game Director, Tony Zurovec.
I had to give some real thought about what it was that I wanted to discuss while I was out here. In the end, rather than going into a lot of intricate detail about one particular feature and running the risk that a lot of you guys here might not find that one topic very interesting, I decided to go broad and touch on a number of different things, while at the same time going deep enough that hopefully you guys will hear some things that you haven't yet heard before. Ultimately, the hope is that you'll come away with a more comprehensive understanding of what we view as the next tier of priorities for Star Citizen's persistent universe. So as many of you have previously heard, our long-term objective is for a fully systemic world. And what this means is that we want a dynamic, logical environment with a completely consistent set of rules that can intelligently adapt to whatever players throw at it to ensure that the level of challenge is always going to be appropriate. This is really important for a number of reasons, and one of the biggest ones is that we want to give players total freedom. So this causes a lot of problems for a game designer, though, because it means that we can't really assume anything, and at times certain elements of the game can become extremely unbalanced. So for example, every player might simultaneously decide that they want to live the life of a pirate and start attacking cargo freighters that are ferrying platinum from a refinery to a production facility. So if everything were to remain static, if the game couldn't appropriately compensate, it wouldn't feel like our real world, and it definitely wouldn't feel very fun. What you'd really expect instead would be a lot of changes as players started to go that route. Those cargo freighters should demand higher fees to travel into such a dangerous area. The price for an armed escort should go through the roof, which should, of course, entice a lot more players and NPCs into going out and actually serving as security. So miners should react to these elevated prices, of course, by trying to find and produce more platinum. And in the end, this is really just basic supply and demand economics. And the effects that it generates serve as counterweights to the pressure that the players exert. They're essentially attempts by the system to compensate for these imbalances that occasionally take hold. And so this algorithmic content, of course, can sometimes feel a bit formulaic if you take it too far, when that's all there is to a game. And that's why we're layering on a lot of custom handcrafted content onto that systemic backdrop, unique characters, specific challenges, and a lot of
times 2. Now you prove the point. You looked at me, 1 and 1 became 3. I'm glad we drew that joint. I do adore our family of 4, and life is simply grand. I've come alive like jazz in 5 because you took my hand.
Welcome to Orison, the Empire's only orbital in-atmosphere vehicle production line. Stanton II's first orbital platforms were built by the UEE Navy in 2855 and considered by many to be an engineering marvel of the time. Used to repair capital ships, Providence platform played an important role in keeping our brave starmen flying and helping the universe stay safe. Crusader Industries adopted Stanton II as its new home in 2865. Soon after, Providence platform was converted into one of the most advanced shipyards
crafting. So setting up an algorithmic system like this means that we need to be able to objectively evaluate an item's value. And this has been a real problem for us in the past because the original ship and item prices were pretty arbitrary. They were really just best guesses that were made at the time. Starting with 3.3, however, we've moved to a model that allows us to much more precisely define what's required to produce an item, including everything from the type and quantity of materials, the amount of labor that's going to be involved, the production technology, the factory capacity, the amount of time that will be required. And these pricing changes are going to ripple through the entire production pipeline. And this is crucially important to us because the price of one item, basically this is a really important step forward because it gives us clarity with regards to how dozens of other variables within the system need to react, and thus it enables some of the much more complicated equations that we need to enact to accomplish this, to be realized. Here we have a chart that I had Jake Mealy, one of our Austin designers, create right in the last few days before this, and what it essentially illustrates is a price breakdown of the freelancer ship. And this is a work in progress, and the values will inevitably evolve, but it should give you a pretty good sense of how we're measuring and evaluating these things. So looking at this, you can see, for example, that the relative percentage of the freelancer's price that's caused by the shield generator in blue towards the bottom, that's not arbitrary. The size and strength of that shield generator were determined by the same equations that would be used to calculate shield generators used in other ships. And it's that consistency, that objectivity, that's really important to us. And what this means is that if something like the price of a commodity used in the production of that shield generator, or maybe what a unit of labor costs at the factory where they're produced, if that changes, we'll be able to precisely calculate what that means for the price of both shield generators, freelancers, and anything else that uses those elements within its production. And this is basically just another view of that same pricing model showing off a half dozen ships being compared. The proposed price you can see at the far left, and you'll start to see some of these rippling into the game here relatively soon. This more objective way of looking at ships and items is also really beneficial when we're trying to ascertain what kind of capabilities we want to bestow upon a new item, because it allows us to easily visualize where there may be gaps in the offerings that would make a lot of sense to fill. And there are some additional benefits to this systemic approach. At the top of the list, I would say, is the fact that it's intuitive. You basically just tend to expect that if there's a shortage in something, that prices are going to rise, and that if there's a surplus, that prices are going to fall. You won't typically have enough information at your disposal to know exactly how a change in price in one thing or another will ripple through the economy. But at a macro level, you should be able to intelligently infer quite a bit. And this actually leads to another major positive, which is that systemic systems tend to reward very clever gameplay. basically, behavioral changes tend to, without trying to go too deep into this, behavioral changes tend to often lag behind an economy, which in turn leads to boom and bust cycles. And this happens in the real world all the time. If you think about copper, for instance, if worldwide demand for copper were to jump dramatically tomorrow, then mining companies would add an extra shift in order to be able to compensate, to allow them to ramp up production. And if demand were to still outstrip supply, then they might think about bringing on more workers, but that could take months before they actually get these guys hired up and trained. And if a demand was exceptionally robust, they might even consider searching for new mines, constructing new refineries, and things of that sort. But at that point, you're really talking about many years before that additional production capacity would actually come online. And the reverse, of course, is true as well. Overcapacity tends to lead to prolonged down cycles in prices. And these natural swings in prices, they can make life very difficult for the unprepared, but clever players are going to see tons of opportunity. So if you're a miner focused on copper and the price tanks, you've got lots of different options. You could always, of course, change to a different occupation, take up, bounty hunting or something completely different. You might cut back on what you're willing to pay combat escorts or eliminate them entirely on the presumption that since the ore you'd be carrying is fetching less, pirates would likely be less attracted and you're less drawn to you. Or you might try to focus on increasing your efficiency by turning your attention to higher quality mines so that you could basically attain more value, realize more value with fewer trips, which basically means less fuel, less time, less crew costs if you actually have that, et cetera, et cetera. Another option, one of my favorites, would actually be speculation. You could always continue to extract whatever material you're focused upon, but rather than actually selling it into the open market, you might just go and rent additional cargo storage space and store it. There's a cost and there's a risk to that, though, in that storage space doesn't come free. And so you're basically making an investment on the presumption that prices are going to bounce back within some sort of reasonable period of time. But in the end, these are all just alternative ways by which different players will choose to deal with the inevitable modulation of prices that you get with economies that tend to behave fairly realistically. Now, on occasion, I'll make reference to a variety of different types of NPCs, for specific types in particular, and so I thought that it might make a little bit of sense for now and in the future to basically give you guys a little bit of background on what I'm talking about when I refer to these. Simulated NPCs are really at the heart of the background economy. They're extremely simple entities that are endowed with just very basic personality traits that help to dictate their behavior. They're never going to be directly seen, and their purpose is to allow the economy to intelligently flow and react to the different imbalances that it's going to see. They'll directly fuel things like factory labor and help to determine what missions are available, where and for what price. They'll also dictate the actual number of NPCs that you'll see at a given landing zone and their occupations. Their actions are also going to provide inputs to the so-called probability volumes that so that what you see in a given area is truly representative of what you should be seeing if you could actually delve down into this little virtualized world. Probabilistic NPCs are much closer to the actual game. They're handled on the back end, and basically the NPCs that they represent, they're not technically NPCs at all. They really are just probabilities. This functionality has actually been in the game since 3.0, but as of right now, designers still dictate their contents by hand. And as noted above, this is actually going to change when simulated NPCs start to come online. And this entire concept is basically a large optimization that allows us to track key elements at the level of detail needed without impacting anything that any player could actually ever see. Virtual NPCs, which I'll sometimes refer to as spoofed, these are actually going to come online next year, and they're particularly interesting for a number of different reasons. I'm going to go into more detail about these a little bit later in the presentation, and so we'll come back to that. The last type of NPC, of course, are real NPCs that you actually see within the game. These are the non-player characters that, for all practical purposes, could just as easily be another player. They're fully simulated, they're quite expensive, and it's for this reason that all of these other types of NPCs actually exist. It would be exorbitantly expensive, computationally expensive, which ultimately to you guys means that you'd see, frame rates take a hit. We'd have, much higher server costs if we were actually trying to do this. If we were actually trying to simulate everything in completely realistic fashion. And again, as I'll get to in a little bit, there are actually some negatives that even if we were going about doing things to that level of detail and really were willing to, try to, fully emulate, every single entity, there are actually some significant negatives to that. So another thing that I wanted to touch on is the dynamic mission system. And this is actually one of the more important pieces of gameplay tech that's going to debut next year. But before I get into that, it would make sense to talk a bit about where we currently stand and some of the limitations that we currently face. So right now, all of the mission content that we have within the game is completely static. There's no way for the designers to control how many of a given mission is available at a given location or the price or anything of that sort. There's also no way for them to automatically customize those missions based upon the current state of the economy. Now, the designers have, valiantly attempted to circumvent some of these limitations as best they could, but the reality is that they've just been missing a critical piece of the puzzle. And so the dynamic mission system is intended to change all of that, to provide a direct link to the economy so that things can be algorithmically customized as appropriate without requiring any sort of special effort on the part of the designer. And before I get too far into this system, though, I want to define one more term that's going to occasionally pop up and that you have probably heard quite a few times just in various chats on the website. Environmental mission scenarios are created via subsumption, very much like normal missions. One key difference, though, is that they often don't have explicit objectives that you're intended to accomplish. They're used to basically create the world that should just be going on around you, but which we don't actually construct unless you're there to actually see it. These scenarios are instantiated via probability volumes, which are basically regions of space that define the likelihood of encountering different things. And it's within these volumes that the probabilistic NPCs I mentioned earlier exist, if you really want to call it that. So as a player makes their way through a probability volume, it queries a library of mission content to determine what the player should see, and then it actually creates it. And so for the quantum mechanically inclined amongst you, this is basically like you're flying around the universe, collapsing the wave function wherever you go. That's where the probabilities basically, coalesce into reality, and you can actually see it. That's where we take things, out of, the land of probabilities, which we do because it's so much more efficient,
Combining the benefits of low-gravity construction with the ease of atmospheric manufacturing, Crusader Industries can produce larger spacecraft faster and safer. Notice how our unique platforms allow the framework of the Hercules Starlifter to be reinforced without the strain of full gravity, using a bonding technique only possible in breathable atmosphere. And in preparation for the next generation of starships, Crusader engineers are already hard at work developing new innovative manufacturing techniques. When it comes to the future of spaceflight, at Providence Platform, the sky's the limit. But what about beyond the shipyards? Since its founding, Orison has continued to grow and change into much more than industrial platforms. Today, it's known as an unforgettable destination where employees and visitors alike can gather among the clouds to relax and unwind. At the heart of this new Orison is Cloudview Center, where luxurious gardens feature breathtaking vistas, renowned art installations, and first-class shops and entertainment. With all this, it's easy to see why millions of people consider Crusader a journey worth making. all made possible thanks to the most important part of Crusader Industries, our incredible family of workers. Enjoy your visit.
It all started with a dream. The need to challenge the conventions of our time. To look at the well-worn path ahead and decide to take another route. What is life if not the culmination of all decisions we've made and the roads we've traveled? We decide to seek out the unknown. Or take a stand against the unjust in the universe. We are all chasing who we are, who we want to be. Which begs the question, why choose it all? Introducing the all-new Alpha, Beta, Delta, Gamma. 2948 Mustang. Dream redefined for the modern era.
At that point, we actually create real NPCs on a real server which you can interact with. So a volume might indicate that there's a certain chance of encountering a cargo freighter and a slightly smaller chance of encountering a pirate. So as you fly around that area, then you'll occasionally see a cargo freighter and a bit less frequently a pirate. And I mentioned earlier that there were some significant negatives, even if we were to try to simulate everything at a complete level. So one of the benefits of this approach that we're doing, besides being a really effective optimization, is that it allows us to highlight what I'd call the interesting moments. If you think about how large space is and how infrequently you actually run into things, the odds that you'd ever run into a cargo freighter right as a pirate was closing on them, or just as the pirate had disabled them and had docked to their ship and was just about to begin a breaching operation, the odds of you coming upon that at that particular moment would be infinitesimally small. But it's actually those moments that are sometimes the most interesting from a gameplay perspective. And so what we get with this system, besides all the optimization, is really just a natural predisposition towards a higher than normal frequency of that type of thing happening. So getting back on track a little bit, the dynamic mission service serves as an intermediary between the game servers and the universe economy service, periodically querying the simulated universe and then using that information to modify all sorts of things that the players will directly see and experience. And this means that missions will start being offered only at locations where they're actually needed, where there's a legitimate function that the economy has determined needs to be performed, and that the prices offered will be justified by what's currently happening within the world. So the dynamic mission system is also going to allow for a lot more intelligent customization of missions, which in turn is going to equate to a lot more variety. And this won't just be the case for the missions that you explicitly accept, it'll also carry over to environmental mission scenarios. So right now, when a probability volume instantiates one of these environmental mission scenarios, the content is totally fixed. There's no way to customize anything based upon the current situation at that particular moment. With this system, though, we'll be able to start doing things like dictating the type and quantity of cargo, whether a cargo freighter should have escorts, a ship's current level of damage, and all sorts of other things based upon what makes sense in that area. And this is probably kind of an esoteric concept, but to give you a better understanding of why this is a really powerful concept, I'll go into a quick and very simple example. So imagine that there is an asteroid field with a lot of very valuable resources and a distant refinery, and thus there's a lot of back and forth activity. There's basically mining ships that are heading, from the refinery out to the asteroid field, extracting value, and then heading back with a full cargo hold. So between those two locations, there are also a lot of pirates. So there are a lot of things that you can or that you should be able to infer about this scenario, all of which the dynamic mission system is going to help automatically resolve. So if you were to fly between the asteroid field and the refinery, you'd of course expect to occasionally encounter a miner, sometimes encounter a pirate, and sometimes both. However, if you ran into a miner heading towards the asteroid field, you'd expect that their cargo hold would actually be empty. They were heading there to go stock up. Similarly, if a miner were heading back towards the refinery, you'd expect that their cargo hold would not only be full, but that it would be loaded up with whatever commodities were present within that asteroid field. And pirates obviously would logically focus on those miners that had something of value, such that you'd expect miners on the way to the asteroid field to typically be in a completely undamaged state. When they were basically heading in that direction, they had nothing of value. And those that were heading back to the refinery that you encountered would sometimes be much worse off, which would effectively reflect the fact that they may have already tangled with some pirates and just managed to get away. And so if you ran into a scenario where a pirate ship had disabled a freighter, docked with it, and it was getting ready to or already breaching, you'd also expect that the freighter must therefore have cargo, be returning from the field, or else the pirate would have logically tangled with a completely different ship. So the dynamic mission system is going to allow us to customize a lot of this content automatically, so that the things you see are completely logical in nature without the designers having to do any special work. So one more big one to hit here, which is mission spoofing. That's another major feature that the dynamic mission system is going to expose. I've spoken a good bit about how a lot of stuff doesn't really become real. It doesn't start getting simulated by the game servers where it's really expensive until there's actually a player around to see it. Prior to that, things are kept in a much more efficient state. But there's one big problem with this approach, and that's the fact that some NPCs, even the ones that aren't near a player, have a legitimate need to exist in something more than just probabilistic form at significant distances from players. And that's because of the service beacon. So the dynamic mission system is going to query the probability volumes to determine the frequency and specifics of service beacon requests. This would equate to NPCs that are asking you for a service. In other words, you may be getting a call from a guy that's far away, and we don't want to, once again, go to all the effort of creating him until it's really necessary. And so what the system will do is effectively spoof those offers. It will create a little virtual NPC. That NPC will be able to fire commands through the normal communication network, and what you'll see will look and feel just like a request from any other player. It's only at the point that the beacon was actually accepted, when a player agreed to provide the service that the NPC was requesting, that the system would actually transform this spoof, this lightweight NPC, into a real NPC with which you could actually interact. And this might seem like a lot of effort, and it is, but it's really necessary, because the reality is that most of the service beacons that are going to get dispatched throughout the system will never be answered by a player. They may effectively be canceled by an NPC that decides to take it. And so what we don't want to have is for every player to have 10 service beacons getting fired off and be creating all of creating all those characters, creating all of those ships, executing all that logic when there's no one around to actually see it. So there's one other thing here that I wanted to talk about, which is the focused NPC generation. And basically this applies to players, it applies to two different things. The first thing is actually players with a large price on their head are inevitably going to attract bounty hunters, and they're not all going to be players. These NPCs are handled a bit differently because they have actual purpose. And when they finally run into you, it's not going to be a random encounter, and thus they're not particularly good candidates for the normal random probabilistic distribution within a probability volume. So you can think of them a bit as ghost NPCs that quietly track you around the universe, following any breadcrumbs you're leaving and doing their very best to find you. Once the system has determined that they've succeeded, they'd arrive on the scene, finally get converted into a real NPC and engage you just as a player might. This focused NPC generation also plays a role in the creation of NPC service providers. And this is, to some degree, the mirror image of what I discussed a moment ago, but this time it involves the creation of an NPC in response to your requesting a service. In such cases, the dynamic mission service will query the probability volumes to determine whether an NPC would respond, and if so, they'd be instantiated and directed towards your location. So this is effectively what would happen when you're requesting combat assistance, or you're requesting passenger transport, or you're asking, to be refueled or repaired, and no players take the call. So at that point, what the system is going to do is effectively query all of the NPCs that would theoretically exist within that area and determine whether or not any of them would actually be interested, and if so, it's at that moment that they actually, become real. So the next thing up is the law and order system. We're going to be making a lot of changes to the law and order system over the next year, but before getting into that, it probably makes sense to give a quick recap of where we currently stand. So at the moment, we currently have the concept of a global criminal reputation, which is a bit like a rolling history of your criminal actions. It can't be altered except via time and the actions that you do. We also have a wanted level, and it increases whenever a crime is committed within range of an operational comm array, and it can be removed by hacking a terminal or by getting killed by AI security or a bounty hunter. And lastly, if a bounty hunter takes out such a criminal, you immediately get paid. So there are a number of problems with this system, and we'll get into a little bit of detail. So the new law system is going to revolve around the concept of these hierarchical jurisdictions. And a jurisdiction is basically just an area that defines its own set of laws, or which adds or extends the laws of its parents. So you might think of the UEE as the federal government, Crusader might be considered a state, and Port Olisar could be considered a city. The laws of the UEE would certainly be within, in force within Port Olisar, but Port Olisar might go a bit farther and prohibit the possession of certain substances within its jurisdiction. And each of these jurisdictions are going to maintain their own criminal database, and it will be accessible to all law enforcement, all AI security and bounty hunters that are registered within that jurisdiction. And here's a list of some of the crimes that we've been debating. Theft would, of course, just be taking something that doesn't belong to you. Manslaughter, killing without malice. A good example of that would be a bounty hunter that's in the process. They're in close proximity to a bounty, that they're actually after, and they inadvertently kill someone else. In that case, you can kind of infer that they probably didn't do it intentionally, and thus the penalty should be a lot less than something intentional like murder. But it might involve something like, temporary ejection from the Bounty Hunters Guild, et cetera. And this is, intended to discourage bounty hunters from getting too careless, when they've basically been authorized to go after people, within these secure zones. Next up would be illegal mining, and that would really just equate to extracting resources from a parcel of a planetary body or moon that you don't own, that it belongs to another player, or perhaps it belongs to the government and it's not been opened up for public mining. Illicit cargo, that would involve transportation or possession of a material that's deemed illegal, maybe an addictive drug or a volatile compound that requires a special license to transport. Smuggling would involve
Armin Humble here, back on the mean streets of Area 18. Cities like this are teeming with scumbags and lowlifes that would just as soon shoot you in the face as give you the time of day. That's where I come in. When preparing for patrol, it's important to check your armor, your sidearm, and of course, limber up. Staying loose is your #1 weapon when it comes to stopping crime. Trust me, the only thing standing between you and an unceremonious death in the gutter are security professionals like me.
Don't test me.
Oh there, buddy. Oh, take a step back now.
Who the hell are you?
Armin Humble, freelance security
A
professional.
freelance cop. For crying out loud.
And coming with me.
Die, fake pig.
Armor? Check. Sidearm? Check. Should have stretched, scumbag. Don't worry, no need to thank me. You're welcome. Stopped a crime.
Either stolen
Burrito time.
or illicit. Murder would, of course, be one of the more obvious ones. It just involves, the outright killing, of a player within a secure zone for no justified reason. False ID would basically equate to you using a kit that allows you to throw off a false signature so that when you're actually scanned by others, you can basically, give them a sense that you might be law-abiding. Quantum interdiction and dampening, those would relate to the illegal creation of a field intended to inhibit quantum travel, which of course is a tactic that's going to be very popular with pirates looking to snare their prey. And each of the laws within these jurisdictions will be able to be associated with a penalty, and this can be anything from as minor as a fine that might elevate to a bounty if you don't pay it on time. It could result in bounties, and there are two different bounties. There's the dead or alive variety, and then there's capture. Capture would typically apply to some of the less serious crimes, smuggling, to where you weren't actually causing bodily injury to someone. Prison duration, how much time you're actually going to serve as a result of this. Banishment, you could be restricted from going into a particular city or zone for some period of time. Now, the law system relies upon security forces being able to ascertain whether an individual has a criminal record, and this will be handled by various forms of scanning. So the quickest and simplest type of scan is for ships, and it's somewhat akin to basically running a license plate. The next up would be the FPS variant, and this requires you to be in close proximity to another character and to have a view of the character's face. Security forces can, of course, do more than just try and identify a known criminal. They can also try to detect crimes that are still in progress. To that end, ships will be able to be scanned for more than just the license plate. A deeper, more time-consuming scan, one that requires a bit more player skill, can return the quantity and type of cargo on board. And this will also be of value to pirates who want to basically know whether or not a freighter has anything that's interesting before they actually move in to engage. Upon verification of the presence of illicit cargo, a bounty would be automatically issued if it didn't already exist, and the security officer would then be cleared to engage as appropriate. And then there would be a still deeper, more time-consuming, more skill-requiring scan that would allow you to, effectively detect smuggled cargo. There will be few NPCs and probably few players that are actually going to master that, and thus, in general, smuggling will typically be a relatively safe occupation, except in the most secure zones. All of these scans are, of course, detectable by the target, with more skillful scanners less likely to be noticed. As with the current system, security forces are spawned via environmental mission scenarios, and thus encounters with them are purely by chance based upon the density of security in that area. And these forces aren't immediately hostile. It's similar to just running into a cop while you're driving on the streets. So unless you actually get scanned, they don't really know your identity. Once security has verified that you're a known criminal, then everything changes. You get a pursuit rating, and all of a sudden, security is not summoned to that area merely, incidentally as a result of the probability volume. Now it actually directs additional security traffic towards you. And so the way to basically, get them off your tail is to evade them for a significant period of time, at which point your pursuit rating will gradually go down and the density of directed NPCs will basically, gradually dissipate. The last thing I wanted to go into on the law and order system is prisons, and they're going to effectively serve as additional deterrent to committing crimes within lawful areas. And I can't go into too much detail here since we're still working out the details of exactly what type of gameplay you'd experience while confined. And I'm sure we'll start out fairly modestly and then gradually ramp up the ambition. We definitely want to have some interesting characters and missions within the prisons, which can in turn open up some interesting doors on the outside. Manual labor to reduce your prison sentence, penance for being bad, is also pretty high on our list. Players with a bounty on their head that are captured or killed would be immediately transported to prison, and the duration of their sentence would depend upon the number and severity of offenses. We're also going to wind up introducing some anti-theft devices, because right now it's far too easy to basically steal these enormously expensive ships that represent a tremendous store of value. So we'll likely implement things along the lines of a security pad that would either require a significant amount of time or some hacking skill for you to bypass, or a physical key that resides on your body, which basically means someone can't actually start your ship unless they at the very least first take you out and then search your body. We're also going to make it substantially more difficult for you to fly these stolen ships throughout the system. And by that I mean players with stolen ships are going to become much less able to frequent a bunch of the shops that provide refueling repair services. So they're therefore going to have to head out to the criminal areas, the lawless areas, in order to take care of a lot of those types of basic operations. And of course, the prices out there are going to be more expensive, and there's also just the added hassle of making the journey. So after talking so much about the law and order system, I think it probably only makes sense to give you guys a little bit of a sense as to where we're headed with bounty hunting. One of the first few things you're going to notice once the dynamic mission system starts to come online will be the directed NPC bounty hunters. And I spoke about this a bit earlier in the dynamic mission system section. But these bounty hunters won't be dependent upon a probability volume to spawn them, and their capabilities and frequency are going to increase as the price on your head grows. Many jurisdictions will have a resident bounty hunting guild, and there are a lot of benefits to registration. There are also going to be some costs. Some will require a certain level of reputation in order for you to join. Some will require a recurring membership fee, and others may require you to maintain a certain quota of bounties. One of the largest benefits to registering is that you'll gain access to a mobiGlas bounty hunting application that can show you a wealth of information about that jurisdiction's criminals, including their names, crimes, bounties, total reward being offered, and most importantly, their last known position and ship. And this information is updated in real time so that once you're registered as a bounty hunter, anything that detects the presence of a known felon within that area will be automatically broadcast to you. And this all kind of goes towards, in the direction of making life, more difficult for people that are going out and committing these crimes, and then basically trying to wander, around through secure systems. One of the nicer aspects of the new system is basically that it's going to eliminate the need to manually accept individual bounties. Now you're just going to automatically be registered. You're going to automatically have knowledge of any bounties that are known by that jurisdiction. It's also going to improve navigation. There will be no more clumsy going to the star map and trying to basically pick whatever zone or region is closest to the last known location of your target. One of my favorite features is actually quantum trail tracking, and that's not just a feature for bounty hunters, but they're certainly going to use it a lot. Whenever a player jumps from one location to another, they're going to leave a trail that, with the right equipment, you'll be able to see. And this means that if your bounty or whoever you're chasing manages to jump away, you'll be able to follow them. So the quality of the bounty, the quality of the tracking equipment and the size of the ship is going to dictate how long this trail can be detected. So you'll need to be fairly close on the heels of your prey if you want to have a chance at actually following. Another change that will involve what we're calling virtual, again, spoofed NPC bounties. And this is similar to the ghost concept that I mentioned before, except in this particular case, the spoofed NPCs are your targets. And so you can think of it as you're registered as a bounty hunter. Of course, you'll be tracking the players, but we're also going to have a lot of NPCs, that we don't want to truly have driving around, flying ships, doing all of this expensive stuff unless there's a player to see them. And so you can think of them as just little point-like entities that can move from location to location, occasionally tripping the security alarms so that you can actually follow them. And they'll generate everything just as a player would in terms of they'd go to a system, then you may wind up seeing them trip a facial ID camera at a particular area. And if you get there quickly enough, there would actually be a good chance that they'd be in that location. If it turns out that they're not in that area, then you may see a quantum trail that's been left by this little virtual entity. And so effectively, it's going to allow you to start truly hunting people. Right now, as soon as you kill someone with a bounty on your head, you get paid. This is going to change so that payment is withheld until you've delivered proof of death to the appropriate security office. Capture bounties are going to work similarly, but with one key difference. If an NPC is disabled, they'll simply surrender and follow you, with the idea being that you'd take them to the designated prison, at which point you'd be paid. It's slightly different for a player because it wouldn't be very fun if another player captured you to basically sit on their ship for who knows how long, and there's no guarantee that they'd take you straight to the prison. So if you actually wind up submitting another player, at that moment, they're simply teleported to prison. You wind up getting a proxy NPC to fill their place. That proxy NPC will behave just like a normal NPC that you captured, and you march them back to go collect your money. Bounty hunters won't, of course, be simply confined to space. There will be FPS bounty hunters, both players and NPCs wandering around the cities. And so every time, if you're actually moving through a city, you've got a price on your head, and people start, coming up to you and basically, focusing on you a little bit too long. It may be a sign that they're actually running your ID, and they may be authorized to engage you as soon as they get verification. Also wanted to talk a little bit about salvage. Salvage revolves around the extraction of bits of value from a ship. And there are three distinct methods of salvage. The first one is component extraction, and that simply involves the removal of components from the ship. This may require bypassing a security system to gain access to the module, or cutting the items from their fixed housings. These components will often be small enough to be carried, and thus significant value. Power generators, shield generators, batteries, and things of that sort can be gleaned from these ships with enough trips. Data extraction involves transferring electronic data from the ship to another medium. Some forms of data can only be copied if the original is destroyed, enabling only a single instance of that data. Some data may require decryption before it's accessible. Some tamper-proof systems may limit how many attempts you can actually make at decrypting it, et cetera, et cetera. There are many different types of data that will be, that can be found on a ship, and I'll detail but more of those in a few slides from now. The last and most visual method of salvage is hull scraping, which essentially entails using a salvage beam to vaporize the outer hull of a ship and collect that material and store.
You suffered a catastrophic injury, but you're okay now. Now don't rush anything. You're free to go when you feel comfortable.
What's cool about Alpha 3.8? New planets, new tech, new features. It's like we're exploring new frontiers here.
Except the materials extracted can occasionally be in purified form. And so I included a video, it's from a couple years ago, just to kind of illustrate the concept. And basically, this is just the damage texture, which is very, the same basic tech that we're going to use to extract it. So you could think of it as salvage. Salvage for the hull scraping would be equivalent to this combined with the mining arm and tractor beam that you see in mining right now, to where you're literally just ripping the exterior hull, and therefore different ships will have different materials, and therefore different quantities of value that you can pull from this in this fashion. And the last thing I wanted to touch on today is actually discovery. And this is one of my favorite occupations and involves the acquisition of what I would call locational information. These packets of information can be procured via various methods. They can be actively sought out via scanning. A long-range scan from orbit might indicate that some valuable commodities are present in a given parcel of land, but with a good amount of uncertainty as to the quantity. Information can also be obtained by chance. You might simply be flying around in deep space and come upon a previously undiscovered asteroid field. Perhaps that's what pulled you out of your quantum travel. You can also engage in analysis, say, for example, by inspecting a parcel of land up close and personal so that you attain a level of certainty you wouldn't be able to achieve from a long-range scan. And so you can think of discovery in some sense as the grease that allows other occupations to function and or focus. Salvage ships need to know where there's something we're salvaging, and a lot of miners will want to focus on the actual process of extracting value rather than the very different skill set that will be required in terms of finding those materials. There are a lot of different types of locational information, and some of those allow for successive deeper layers of discovery, sometimes increasing the value dramatically and other times rendering the find completely worthless. A chunk of metal determined to be a wrecked or derelict ship that was found via a long-range scan might have a very small amount of value, but not nearly as much as if you actually took the time and ventured closer and verified the type of the ship and its current state, whether it had already been stripped down, in which case it would have no value, or whether it was operational, in which case the value would be worth quite a bit more. Similarly, the discovery of a previously unknown asteroid field or a comet wouldn't be worth a lot, although verification that they contain valuable resources that are currently in high demand could make their value skyrocket. A planetary body or moon has millions of parcels of land, and close inspection of a parcel enough to verify that something of value is present would also result in the creation of a bit of information. And lastly, a stable intrasystem wormhole that allowed a lot of travel time to be saved would often find a willing market. And there are other things, geysers, nebula, et cetera, that will be of various interest to scientists, tourists, tourist NPCs, things of that sort. And these packets of information that you collect are stored within a dedicated mobiGlas application and allow you to share that information with other players and organizations. And it's important to note that the value of information degrades over time. So if you were to find, say, a rich deposit of gold on the surface of a planet, and gold was currently had a very high market value, then that very recent information would have a lot of value. If on the other hand you sat on it for a week or 2 weeks, at that point it's not worth very much at all, because you don't know whether or not that gold has since been extracted, whether it's actually still there. So you can periodically go back and refresh your knowledge, travel to the location to verify that no one actually found that remote location in the mountains where you'd found that gold, and thus your find is intact. At that point, it's now current information again, and its value would once again reflect that. So information can be sold to info brokers, which is one of the primary ways by which players that engage in discovery will actually make money. They'll buy and sell based upon the current market value, which will be, again, dictated by supply and demand. So if the price of aluminum is in the tank, you wouldn't be able to make much selling the location of a ship that had a lot of aluminum on its hull. And so information in this sense is very much a commodity, and its value is going to ebb and flow with with other things in the economy. And once an info broker has actually purchased this information, it's going to be freely available for other players and NPCs to bid on, like they would with with any other asset. So that's basically it. I'm sorry it went a little bit long. Say again?
Still got 10 minutes, man.
Wow, I thought it went long. Well, what we could do is we could basically, so what we have right here is Jake Mealy and Rob Reininger, two of the Austin designers. As I mentioned earlier, Mealy is practically single-handedly responsible for all of the vast changes and the much more efficient, algorithmic content that's being layered onto the pricing models that we're utilizing. And so these guys could answer any questions in any level of detail that you may have in that area. Yeah, that's called payback.
The ultimate parry.
So if we do have a few minutes, we could answer a few questions. If anybody's got anything. Sure.
With the prison, are you looking at online time or offline time? Can I be a bad guy, go to prison, log out, log in my ult until my prison guy serves his time? Are you seeing, what's your vision of that?
I would lean towards thinking that it's probably just constant time, but again, the prison itself is still in the relatively early stages. There will be a lot of iteration. Like I said, we'll like we do with a lot of things, we'll start out relatively minimalistically, and then we'll gradually expand out. Some of the bigger questions that we're facing in terms of the prison stuff is how do we make it fun? Exactly what type of gameplay are you engaged in there? Because it's a confined space, and we know that we want to have the potential to meet interesting characters. It'd be almost like if you go back, a year and a half ago to where we had Area 18, and you were confined to that space. And so imagine that space, and you've got gangs in there, and you can actually associate yourself with one of them, and that relationship translates to when you actually get released to the outside. And there would of course be the potential to actually escape from prison. And so there's a lot of potential that would really just be doing the same stuff that we're doing in a lot of other places. I mean, you build up a personal reputation with other characters within the game already. This one is, again, it's something that we don't expect the average player to be getting locked away for long periods of time, because we don't expect the average player to be committing lots of crimes in secure zones. And sure.
That's for the NPC technology. Would that be helpful for, I guess, in two specific cases, being a bonding merchantman seller that's going to a planet and wanting to sell you wares? Would NPCs become aware of your presence?
So you're talking about whether if you had like a price on your head and you're basically moving into?
If you're selling goods as a bonding merchantman owner, that's it. You land on a planet, that's it. Would NPCs just start to hear that there's a merchantman?
That's basically exactly. It's like what you would wind up having is these probability volumes that I mentioned earlier. They effectively give us a mathematical description of what you would potentially see. And like I said, so we are actually, or we will be simulating these things, in more precise detail, like these little point entities. But once we get over to the game side, what we don't want to wind up doing is having to compare, for example, the location of an individual ship with, 1 million or 10 million different NPCs and trying to infer stuff there. And so the probability volumes are really a pre-processing step that's performed in real time that takes this background information and makes it easily digestible for the game, so that, for example, this has been happening for quite a while within the game already, to where every time you jump, what we're basically doing is casting your path through the universe and plotting your course through all of these probability volumes and figuring out where you would actually run into a particular entity. And this is all dictated right now, like I said, specifically by the designers going in and hand setting this stuff. And so the next step is basically hooking that stuff up to the back end economy so that we can start to feed real-time information to these volumes, so that the quantity of pirates, it ebbs and flows based upon what's actually happening. Sure.
With regards to the salvage mechanic, you mentioned that you at some point in time you would be able to get possibly components off some of these salvage ships. Do you foresee the ability to get military grade, certain components of military grade is the first question, and thereby being able to update your own ships by interchanging some of the salvage components? And then will there also be the opportunity, and you kind of touched on it, but will there be the opportunity to salvage nearly fully operational ships that are, through some?
Yeah, well, the opposite of salvage, of course, is repair, and so it's very possible you disable another player, you take out their engines, you take out the crew. Well, now you need to repair the engines before you can go on your way. Or you find a derelict ship, and you basically perform enough repairs. You repair its hull, you basically replace its batteries, you give it a new power module, et cetera, and now it actually becomes operational again. And one of the reasons I should just point out, one of the reasons why component extraction is so high on the list is because it allows us to let players extract a significant amount of value before we actually have to deal with the complicated issues. Like, imagine you have an Idris and you've got these big, enormous, batteries, and you want to actually extract that entire thing. Well, that just becomes, a user interface and logistical nightmare. Whereas components, these nice little, small, easily, carryable things, it's a very simple way for us to allow you to go onto a ship, bypass the security systems, cut off these things, and extract maybe not all, but significant chunks of the value in this manner. Data is the same way. So you can have ships that basically have the location stored on them, just like I was mentioning on Discovery. You can have a ship that has within its database that you can extract, that you can salvage, the location of a comet. Now you go verify the comet and actually see what its current state is. The hull scraping is just another way to basically pull a good chunk of the value of its hull plating and stuff off. And so the reason why those three are at the top of the list is they're the most straightforward and quickest ones to implement, and we want to get the basics of some of these things running as quickly as possible so that we can start to iterate on them and basically broaden the number of things that players can do within the game.
With the discovery location data, do those locations exist temporarily as long as the player has the data? Or are these locations that are permanently like new places to explore, discover, people to come back?
Yeah, they're actually dynamically created, but as long as you retain knowledge of them, they would basically continue.
You can see how beautiful Planet V4 looks. You don't see repetition of biomes.
I don't think there's any other game that has this range of skill.
Microtech, this is the first planet which we approached fresh with V4.
Without V4, we would not have been able to do it.
So as the Lord describes, there was a terraforming accident, very, very cold planet.
If we actually take a look outside, there is a ground snowstorm blowing in.
Server object container streaming is an important milestone because it allows us to achieve a certain scale on the game that we weren't able to previously.
To put more content for the players to explore without being limited by server resources.
That means more planets, more moons, more content.
Relay combat does ship to 3.8.
We understand the allure of the light. We hear the call of the dark. Our legacy is one of precision in design, of balance and inescapable duality. The push and pull of seemingly opposing forces working in concert to create a consonant equilibrium. The Archimedes and the Merlin. Duality of design. Kruger, precision, perfected.
I saw you apply to the Flight Academy again.
I'm your new wingman, sir.
The coil. Local scum use it for cover to launch attacks.
This is their turf, so move when I'm moving. Keep your eyes open.
From point A to point B, or I'm doing a scan and I actually locate a new asteroid field. That asteroid field wasn't necessarily always there. It was created randomly. But now that you know about it, and you can think about this logically as being these things wouldn't be static in the real world, right? These things are moving. So once you find it, well, I know where it's at as long as I keep pretty close, tabs on it. But if I ever just forget about it entirely, you know what? There's asteroids coming and going through the solar system, moving around, all the time. It's like there's no certainty that you're ever really going to be able to find it. Plus, there's always the question mark of, did another NPC, or player find it that you don't know about? Basically, mine it into nothingness. And so there are a lot of reasons why this thing may eventually not be there. But as long as you retain knowledge, as long as you go back and periodically refresh it, then you can keep it, in perpetuity.
Thank you.
Tony, Chris mentioned it a little bit in the opening statement about survival play. I know we've talked about this a lot over the years, but what's the current state of thought in that? Say you get shot down and no comm equipment on a moon or a planet,
Well, that actually plays right into that dynamic mission system and and the probability volumes I was mentioning before, to where, in essence, what you'd wind up doing, you get shot down over a moon, and what you do right now is you basically fire up your service beacon and you basically set it to 100 credits, and basically you ask somebody for help. The problem is that if you're off in some distant moon or whatever the case may be, there may not be a player around you, or maybe the players that are on the same server as you are too far away, or maybe they're engaged in their own missions. And so what we want to do, is basically allow NPCs to start to participate. And so if you're on that moon and you need transport, and you basically throw that request for assistance out there, and no players assist, what the dynamic mission system would then do is query all of the nearby probability volumes and determine whether or not any NPCs would actually be interested in helping you. And that would depend largely upon, again, what they're doing. It's like, is maybe your price is too low, so you're not interested in them. But if you get the price to the right point, you will eventually pull one of those guys in there. And this, again, it's a capability we don't have right now, because there's no easy or effective way for the designers to tap into it. And that's why we've got a lot riding on this thing, and we're so anxious to basically get it in as quickly as possible.
Is the survival mechanic any deeper? Have we thought about that, going into the fact that you don't have any water, food, such and such, so and so?
Yeah. Well, we've got the thirst and hunger is actually on, one of the things on the list that we've got slated to deal with next year, and this would be the same thing for all the NPCs, to where you'll actually start to get, you'll need to basically you'll need to basically drink, you'll need to eat, you'll need to do all of that, or else you'll very gradually, because we don't want to make it too annoying, start to suffer various deleterious effects. Senator?
Question about simulated NPCs. How many, on your backend database, how many variables and arrays are you maintaining just to keep that dynamic information stored so that you can calculate those probability volumes?
At any given time, the spoof ones are actually going to be fairly minimal, because they're not really created except as necessary. In other words, most of the time, so the eventual idea is to be simulating 10 or 20 million of these so-called the simulated NPCs, but they're very, very lightweight, don't need to be updated. If it's when you're talking about that simulation, you're not doing 60 times a second, you're not doing 2 times a second, you're updating these guys once every 5 minutes or so, because it's not as if these simulated NPCs change their occupation on a second by second basis or anything like that. And so what you wind up having is a big repository of these characters that periodically reevaluate and decide, do I want to keep working at this factory, or is there something more attractive? Well, if I leave the factory and I decide to become a miner, what am I actually doing? Oh, well, if he's doing a miner, then all of a sudden there's a demand for more fuel in that area. And if he's not working at the factory, that means all of a sudden that the rates for factory workers, you've got one less NPC that will actually be available to supply that, which means the cost of things that depend upon labor, in general would go up. I mean, one NPC would never really matter. But you get the point. I mentioned also earlier that these simulated NPCs would have a direct impact on the things like the number of NPCs, the occupations that you see within the game. And by this I mean, so if we're simulating, say, 100,000 distinct NPCs, simulated NPCs on the back end, then this may translate into 100,000 divided by 1,000. So you wind up with, well, that's 100 NPCs that you'd actually see walking around. And there would be all of your normal persistent characters, your bartenders, your shopkeepers that are actually very specific characters that have particular lines of dialogue recorded for them. And then there's all of the the so-called background characters. There's the window shoppers and the tourists and the blue collar workers and and all of those sorts of guys. The vagrants, the criminal elements, etc. That we can basically create at will to basically fill up the populace. And the other interesting thing is we can kind of bend that however we see fit, so that if, for example, you've got a mining colony, and therefore there's a lot of blue-collar workers, and there's not much in the way of advanced, production capabilities or anything like that. And all of a sudden, the asteroid field that's near that area winds up getting depleted. Then all of a sudden, there's very little ore being brought in and being utilized, et cetera. And so what you would logically expect is lower per capita income, less employment, more crime, and what you'd wind up seeing over time would therefore be more of these simulated NPCs shifting their occupation from employed blue-collar worker to criminal element, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. All the way to the back.
A question just in general about automated vehicles. You could apply the same AI logic to vehicles and ships, and rather than have a simulated human piloting the ship, you'd have an AI representing, an autonomous ship piloting the ship.
Yeah, that's an interesting one, and I actually cut it because I was trying to not get too crazy on the time, and they're already giving me the sign here. I had a whole section on multi-crew, which we now have. We've talked about multi-crew for a long time, and we've never gone into precise detail about exactly what that meant and how are you going to interface with it, how are you going to hire guys, how are you going to dictate what they did, et cetera. We have enough clarity at this point to where we can talk pretty precisely about that, but that's an hour-long talk in and of itself. And what you mentioned there is one of the optimizations, just to end on, is if you have a crew and you think about, imagine you've got an Idris and it's got 100 characters on it. It's exceedingly inefficient if you've got engineers engineers that you've hired down in the engineering section and there's no other players down there to actually see them. You don't really want them to be pathfinding, animating, doing all of this very computationally expensive stuff. It's incredibly wasteful. And then you think about, well, you can have lots of players with lots of ships, with lots of extra crew. And so everywhere, we're always thinking about ways that we can give you the illusion that it's doing more than what it is, or where we're looking for ways to optimize so that we're getting all of the beneficial end effects, maybe in some cases even more, like I mentioned earlier, without with all of the rampant waste that would come from just blindly doing some of this stuff. And one of the things we've been looking at is basically a couple of different levels of basically tapping down on the NPC functionality so that you would still get all of the behavioral benefits of having an engineer down in the engineering section. He would still repair things at the rate of speed that he normally would. He could still be injured if there was damage done to that part of the ship, but we're able to basically turn off some of those high fidelity, animations, pathfinds, stuff like that are really only of benefit if a player's there. As long as they perform as they would if you were watching them, in another way, there's no reason to do all the extra work.
Last week, we explored some of the new adventures available to players in space in the upcoming Alpha 4.0. But there are even more dangers to be found within your spacecraft and vehicles. Fire is blazing a trail towards its awaited debut in the persistent universe. And while we don't want to burn any bridges with the resource management team, we'll jump out of the fire and into their frying pan in just a few weeks. Wow, I really bet their ears are burning. We're fired up to give the VFX arsonists a chance to set the world on fire this week, or at least just the interior of spaceships, because we don't want them to burn themselves out playing with fire. I'm out of idioms now. I'm gonna go see if I can add more fuel to the fire.
In 4.0, we'll have fire inside of ships. For our initial rollout, we didn't really want players to start fires everywhere. The poor surface, they really wouldn't be able to handle it, so we decided to focus on the interior of ships. They're smaller, more contained, and more controlled. Fire is tightly integrated with the resource network system and a great fit for a first release within the spaceships where resource network will be focusing on as many ships as we can. Starting a fire is based on damage and different kinds of damage.
Fires can be caused by ship items when they hit 0 health. There are also ways for ship items to cause fires in the normal running and operation of them. We're currently looking at making it so that when they misfire and they have the highest level of wear, that there is a chance that they can also cause fires.
But other types of damage, like impacts from weapons or explosions, they could also ignite a fire. Another way to start a fire is getting the environment hot enough to actually get your surfaces to auto-combust. For example, if you open up your door on a really, really hot planet and the hot air starts to flow into your ship, then if that air is hot enough, and some surfaces might start igniting from that.
Seriously? I could open my door and my ship might catch fire?
You would need a room to reach, I think it's like 1,000 Kelvin for those materials to start to smoke.
So it's something that's technically possible, but it's not likely.
If the planet is warm enough, yes.
The hell are you?
We're OMC. And OMC belongs to Sato Khan. Is that your boss? Are we supposed to be scared of him or something? Yeah.
The OMC aren't the only ones listening into comms.
All ships, we're under attack by Vandal forces. Repeat, we are under attack.
There have been battles. There have been losses. Each and every one of you has proven yourself time and again. We will not lose the system. We will not fall back.
Form up, Cal. You got point. Copy that. Tally's on me. Let's say aye.
We will win. Because we have to.
You guys want us to hurry up or keep going?
Hopefully you guys liked it.
If you push something to its absolute limit, a body, a weapon, gravity itself, does it break? Or does it break through? Power beyond expectation. Class-defying maneuverability. Transformative integration of sheer...
I want to be sure. You're saying systemically it's possible?
Systemically it's possible, yeah.
It's technically possible, but very unlikely.
Don't worry, everybody.
Part of the fire hazard system propagation is based on the fire triangle, which is oxygen, fuel, and temperature. Oxygen is tracked by the room system. The atmosphere, that is, most rooms in the universe have their atmosphere tracked, including oxygen. The fuels, they will be tracked on the surfaces, so every surface in the universe is marked up with a surface type. That surface type has different properties for fire propagation to work. The heat that is usually from an ignition source is the damage that could happen, but also if you have an object already on fire, that could start a fire again based on the heat that that fire is emitting. Fire will start small if you have a small ignition point, so it will not start blazing immediately, so it will start propagating quite slowly, but if you leave it untended, then the fire will start growing, and the more it grows, the faster the propagation will happen and the larger the fire will get.
It's quite complicated to have a control over that much energy, heat. It's a balance. I think that's the hardest thing to get, having the balance, having the fire texture that works well with the particle behavior, with the heat, the sparks. You need to have the whole feeling of heat and danger, and it's when you get this spot where it really starts to make you look certainly afraid of it that, yeah, it starts to gets good, I would say.
Each of the materials that we have marked up, they have their properties, and we can set a material to be combustible or not. Most surfaces will be combustible. A few exceptions, such as glass, will not be. But the ones that are, especially in ships, we decided to go for a more tech approach. So even if metal itself will not easily combust, we assume that behind that metal there will be pipes and cables that can catch fire. Based on the properties that each surface type has, for example, wood will burn different from rubber or plastic or metal. So the propagation between those will interact differently. Don't worry, not everything will catch fire at the same time. We have these different properties that will cause different surfaces to catch fire at different times.
You have to think of the other things that can also catch fire. Things like your cargo, which you probably don't want to catch fire because if it burns out, you will lose it. Other things might be loose ship items that you have laying around just in case you want to repair your ship.
The player itself will not be able to catch fire, but the player will feel the influences of fire in their environment. So if you step into the fire, then you will take damage. If you are near to the fire, you will feel the heat, so your actor status will start showing up with higher temperatures. If the fire is not managed properly, for example, your life support can't feed in enough oxygen, then oxygen will be drained and your player will start to asphyxiate.
Why can't I set people on fire?
Tech.
Will you commit here and now that someday we'll set people on fire?
I will commit to nothing.
I tried, everybody.
People will have different ways of setting fires to ships, hopefully other people's ships, not your own. It is important to know for 4.0 that we will not have fire outside of ships. So if you set fire to an item inside one ship, you can bring it to another ship, given that the medium that you're traveling through has enough oxygen to sustain the fire. You can set fire by damaging items in the ship, so shooting them when an item dies, that has a chance to set fire. Other ways to set fire are bringing in ignited items and placing them in someone else's ship. One of the biggest challenges that we recently had with fire was the networking, and Francesco has done a really, really amazing job with getting that ready.
The presence or absence of fire is a very, very important thing to convey to players. You don't want a player stepping into a thing that doesn't look like it's burning or avoiding a thing that looks like it's burning. Synchronizing fire was a very important part of making sure that the feature functioned correctly, and we have a lot of data that fire generates, and a lot of data doesn't work well over networks. There was a lot of work being put into relying as much as possible on the fact that our fire system is stable, it's deterministic, it will always do the same thing given the same initial parameters. There were a lot of cases. There were cases of players joining in late. They obviously don't get where the fire was 3 hours ago. They just say now, they need to know where it is now. There's players who have really bad internet connectivity or servers struggling a lot, situations that bring a halt to the continuous progress of fire from one end or the other, and we need to reconcile that. So we needed a way to know when fire was no longer suitably similar between what the player was seeing and what the server thought was there, and refresh it at that point, and minimize how much data we needed to refresh it at that point. We are pretty happy with the way it works now. We have it so that it sends as little data as possible to sort of create these summarized states for the client and server, and only when these differ enough do we actually send that relatively big, still compressed, but relatively big snapshot to synchronize everything back together.
A fire that is left unchecked will spread throughout your ship. And if it does this and it reaches your ship components,
System is offline.
then you'll be having a very bad day. And this could lead to your ship being both crippled or destroyed. So this means you will be able to put out fires using a fire extinguisher. Where possible, we have made sure that fire extinguishers are readily available throughout our ships.
The extinguishers, they're very simple to use. They are point and shoot. You have to be careful that you don't start flailing wildly with your extinguisher. If you have to aim at the base of your fire and then keep it there to cool down the surface and take away enough of the heat and the oxygen so that the fire calms down. There will be a temperature readout where you can see how strong the fire is still where you're aiming.
And you need to keep your finger on the trigger until it actually goes out. Fires can just be smoking there, and technically it's very close to being on fire. So you really do want to make sure it's really out before you move on. Because if you just leave them smoking and then go wandering off, there's a good chance it will heat up again and catch fire again. It's worth knowing that a fire extinguisher has a limited amount of ammo within it. To your benefit, you can also take your fire extinguishers back to where they are stored, plug them in, and then they will recharge their ammo. However, it is important to know that if your ship doesn't have a functioning life support at this moment, the recharge will not work.
If you leave the fire completely untended, then your ship can completely burn out, so it will look completely black. If the life support can keep up providing enough oxygen, then it will just keep going until all of the fuel, that is the surfaces, has been burnt out. Or if the life support is not running, then your fire will start to diminish. But if you don't do anything, the life support will keep feeding in oxygen enough for the fire to be sustained and start spreading everywhere.
You don't want people to put fires out?
No. I want them to die in a fire.
The views and opinions of Leo do not represent those of Cloud Imperium Games, Private Space Industries, or its subsidiaries.
There are more ways to extinguish fire. With the life support and resource network, you can cut power to your life support for a room, and that means that there will be no more oxygen provided, which means that the fire itself will start using up all the oxygen, and it will extinguish slowly by itself. Another way is to open up your doors to open space. and that will mean that all of the atmosphere is being sucked out into open space, and again, no more oxygen for your fire to continue. After a fire, you can repair your items or replace them. Fire can damage your interior of your spaceship. We have some very beautiful burn decals that Francesco and Guillaume have been working on to show you where your ship has been burnt. The visual damage to the surfaces is not something you can repair manually, but you can go to a repair station and repair your ship there, and that will get rid of all of the visual burn.
But if I want to leave it burned because it looks cool, I can do that?
You can do that. It persists. I'm very happy with the current progress. It's been a very long road for the team to get to this point. It's amazing to finally be able to roll this out to the players.
It's amazing to work with, it's just so fun, and the results are very good and very quick, so.
I'm looking forward to see what people will do with it, like what kind of weird edge cases they'll find, and we'll probably have to fix up. But it's as long as the servers don't die because of fire, I think we will be able to deal with it.
So what did we learn this week? Well, we learned where and how fire will make its first appearances in the persistent universe, in your spaceships. How it'll spread and the dangers of leaving it unchecked. Your spaceships will burn and maybe go boom. And both how you'll put them out or potentially spread the fire to other vehicles. And I'm banking y'all might find some ways that we missed. Now don't forget the ship showdown is still underway. It's your chance to vote on which vehicles you like best, as well as send John Crew messages on social media that he legally has to respond to during this time.
Hi all, David here. The only thing I have to say about this is no. Just no. Our program will now conclude.
For Inside Star Citizen, I'm Jared Huckabee. Thanks for letting us share the people and process of game development with you, and we'll see you all here next week. It's time to go Pyro Planet side.
In short-range combat. Unleash the fury. Only from Mirai.
At Crusader Industries, we believe that our values are more than a standard of behavior. They're our legacy and our inspiration. We don't defend them through sheer size or firepower alone. We ally ourselves with those who share our core beliefs. We make sure the real heroes make it to where they're needed most. At Crusader Industries, we know that lifting up others benefits us all.
how do you start a fire? First, you contact
Okay.
ATC.
Yeah, I could start with that. That would be good. I could say that. You want me to do that? Well, first of all, you start. Yeah, you call the ATC and they set fire to your ship.
We're here at Anvil's IAE base camp, where the Reckless 999 are preparing for their imminent demonstration. Just being this close is enough to give me chills. But the 999 has done me one better, inviting me to fly with them. Now, as you may know, I'm what some call a bit of a speed demon. And thanks to Commander Bunmer and this special training model F8, young Jaxie McCleary's childhood dreams are about to come true, to the tune of as many G's as possible. Shall we, Commander? Let's do it. I've always wanted to do this! Oh! This is intense!
Out here, you've got your crew and your ship. And the only thing that matters is getting the job done. This is your workshop, your playground, your command center. This is your multi-operator laser extractor. Argo Astronautics, building your future.
All right, so that was a look at Outlaw Lifestyle, a glimpse at how the outposts and the space stations have evolved since we saw them at last year's CitizenCon 2951. Now, if you've been following our program today, you might think this is it. We're near the end, but we've got one more special surprise in store. Joining us on the show today are two people who probably need no introduction, but we're going to do it anyway. Founder and CEO, Mr. Chris Roberts.
Hello, everyone. How you doing?
How you doing?
I'm doing good, Jared.
Welcome to the spaceship. Welcome back to the spaceship. You opened the show today. I know. And Squadron 42 game director, Mr. Richard Tyrer.
Hello, how's it going?
Good. This is your first time on the spaceship.
It is. It is.
What you think?
I think it's very nice.
I'm really
comfortable.
happy. I'm just going to ask everybody how it thinks all day. So Chris, Rich, you're here. Are we going to talk a little bit about Squadron 42? Is that what we're doing right now?
Well, yes and no. So both me and Rich have been our heads down working really hard on Squadron as well as helping out on the PU. And one thing that we've thought that would maybe better to reiterate is there's a huge amount of work that we're doing on Squadron that is going to make a massive difference to Star Citizen, the PU. And we wanted maybe to talk about some of the things that we're doing, because I know a lot of people say, well, everyone's working on Squadron, no one's working on the PU, and that's not really true, because a huge amount of the core gameplay that we're working on Squadron is specifically being built not just for Squadron, but to benefit the PU, and we're just doing it in sort of the test kitchen of Squadron to allow us to really, polish and make sure the features work well without having to be caught up in the sort of quarterly release cycle that you have on the PU, because we were finding it was hard for us to really finish the features out. We'd get a tier 0 out, and then it would just sort of sit around for a while because everyone was rushing on to the next set of features they wanted to do. And for Squadron, obviously, it's shipping as a final polished AAA title, so everything needs to be really put together, working really well, and playing great. And so we're trying in the setup that we're doing now to do that for the features that we've identified that we need to make sure works really well for Squadron, but also will play across into the PU. And so we thought it'd be really useful to come by and tell you all about some of the subtle things and the gameplay aspects that we're working on that maybe you haven't heard from Todd or Tony or everyone else that today and during the ISCs, because we sort of try to keep the Squadron stuff close to our chest to really sort of surprise and impress people when we do it. And so, we thought, why don't we just come by and maybe just talk about little things, maybe show you a sneak peek of something here and there, and not everything, because we're trying to keep it close to our chest until it's really ready to let the baby out of the carriage and it's beautifully dressed and all the rest of it. But hopefully it'll give you guys some insight to what's happening, and also understand that a huge amount of the development resources, even if you think they're working on Squadron, are ultimately working on stuff that will be in the persistent universe.
So let's talk a little bit more about that before we jump into the actual features. This co-development has been part of the process since the project was first introduced 10 years ago. Congratulations on 10 years, by the way. Rich, talk to me a little bit about this co-development. You started with the PU, and then you've now gone over to the Squadron 42. So you've worked in both. You've worked in both environments. You know the struggle of T0 features and the quarterly releases for the PU, and now you're getting to your experience is different on Squadron. Talk to me about how that's changed and how it's still work for one still benefits the other, or will ultimately.
Well, when I worked on the PU, it wasn't really the PU or Squadron. It was always, we were working on features that pushed for both projects. So the focus when we were on the PU, or when we were more PU focused, was that we would make sure that we were getting features up and running, developed to the specifications that we needed them to work in a multiplayer environment, and then getting them out into the audience's hands, on quarterly releases. But the biggest issue, I think, if you've seen me doing talks on SC Live over the years, or even in some of our retrospectives, is that we'd get features, and the way that our, CIG is set up is we have feature teams and we have content teams. So what would happen is we'd develop a feature and then we'd push it to the live audience to get feedback around that feature. But there would almost be a lag with the importance of that feature and turning that from a singular thing into an experience, a gameplay experience that you'd go and enjoy and play as a part of a fun game. So we always had this lag where content teams were then trying to get on top and then use the feature, and we were trying to change the feature. So I think this kind of pulled it back a bit, allowed us to really focus on both the content and the feature at the same time, because it allowed us to bring it as under one umbrella, which is Squadron 42. So we were able to get that feature in the game, not as a T0, but as a fully whole, capable gameplay experience that, myself, Chris, we can play and enjoy it and go, is this right? Do we need to make it better? How does it feel? And also prove that out with the content that we want. So once we then developed that and honed it and, almost cast it in that iron, in the crucible kind of thing, we can then move it into the PU, and ultimately, it's not that they're going to get features later, because they would have had them probably earlier, but just not ready. Or I can pick a few features right now where you think, well, there's not really a huge purpose for them. Mounted guns is a good example. It's not really a huge purpose for them in the PU right now, but we're making sure that any feature that we work on has that purpose. So when it does go into the PU, into the game, people can use it and experience it how we wanted it to be designed and how we wanted it to be, because we struggle a few times. Say, for example, actor status is a good example. We have this vision of how it sits across this broad spectrum of the game, but we're having to piecemeal it in. And that never really gives you the true intentions of where we want to go. And I think this allows us to do that in Squadron, really hone it down and then give it to the PU audience. And I think fundamentally it's better for the development of the features, and it's better for the gameplay experience that both players will experience in both products.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point. Is that it's before we were developing the sort of features in isolation, and then they sort of went in to try to get used in Squadron and try to get used in the PU, but they weren't really developed iteratively with content. And so that's the reason why we sort of pulled back some of the stuff and are working on Squadron, is because then we can iterate it with actual gameplay content, which is what Rich is talking about, to make sure it feels well and right with the time to bake it in without having to feel like, oh, okay, we've got a quarterly release out. And because there's a lot that goes on with the quarterly release in terms of it's not just that one feature. There's all these other things that go into it, and there's a whole process of publishing and splitting off the streams, and so there's a huge amount of effort and work every time you do one of these releases that sort of eats into your development time in terms of doing the feature. And so pulling it out of that sort of loop and saying, okay, we're going to work with it in Squadron to really make it polished so it's
with courage, for honor, in strength, to glory.
Welcome to the Exotics Pavilion, where aerospace xenophiles can scratch their wildest alien itches. Even this year's IAE Food Court is embracing the esoteric offerings of our non-human brethren. Take this. What is it again, Jimmy?
They said it was pickled corpse bug.
All right. Pickled corpse bug. Well, down the hatch. Let's go take a look. Every year, the exotic offerings on hand at the IAE get more robust, and 2949 looks to be no exception. From Esperia's chillingly accurate Vandul recreations, to Apoa's aggressive pursuit of the human market, through an expanding line of ships adapted from Xi'an military designs. Even the Banu adapted their stout Defender fighter for human flight back in 2947. Both the ship and its related marketing efforts have come a long way in just a few years. I mean, has anyone seen their early attempts at an advert? Jimmy, do we have a clip? Well, I don't know much about advertising, but now that I see it again, I have to say I sort of miss that authentic Banu charm. After the break, we head to the Aegis Dynamics Pavilion. Stick around. Just when you thought it was safe to go back to Microtech, the Intergalactic Aerospace Expo is back for 2951. Welcome to Whitley's Guide.
Playing it, this is fun, this is challenging, it feels good, is the benefit I think that's happening with us on Squadron. When we're seeing it on our side, I know it can be a bit frustrating for everyone on the other side because we're sort of telling you, oh yes, it's going to be much better than you've got right now. But we are very aware of a lot of, say, usability issues, user experience issues that we are addressing right now in Squadron, specifically for both Squadron and the PU. That's gonna, and we'll show you a couple of little things that will help with that today. But essentially, if you think of core gameplay in terms of, we have some core areas, what we call the sort of the actor system, which would be the FPS, the players moving around on foot, interacting with things, the vehicle stuff, which like John Crew heads up, but the whole vehicle systems, and you've already seen some presentations today on things that are very specific to vehicles, like the sort of need for multiple speeds, and also the resource network, which is going to first roll out in vehicles, but it's going to be universal. All those are sort of core gameplay systems that we have, and so what's happening now is that we're taking some of these systems and really just making them work well for Squadron, and then bam, they're going to come across into the PU. Another good example, which hasn't been talked today very much by the vehicle side of the Need for Speed, but you probably saw, in the different modes, there needs to be more stuff on the HUD, and we've got a whole redesign that's happening on the HUD and the MFDs. That's going to be very different than what you have now. First of all, it's using universal building blocks instead of what some of the legacy stuff has in Flash, but it's going to be much more minimalist depending on what your context is. It's going to be, depending on what equipment you have, you may be able to cast some stuff to your visor, maybe not. And we're building this system to work well in all the ships used in Squadron, and then it will get rolled out to the PU, which has obviously much wider range ships. But as we're designing it, we're building it with both Squadron and the PU in mind. And so there's a lot of things, people have talked about the star map forever, or, so that has definitely been a major, there's right now, I think, 3 engineers, a couple of visualists on it that we're really sort of working to make, the new star map, which people haven't had. It's been in development yet. We're not quite ready to show you today, but that is going to be a much improved experience. But all of it, so navigation, traversal, combat, the whole feel of it, all things that we're really focusing on here to bring across into the PU after we've got it working really well in Squadron. And so I think ultimately it's going to be good for the PU, and a lot of things are going to sort of come together over the next couple of years. We're pretty excited, so we wanted to visit you and talk a little bit about it.
I think there is 2 common themes that I think you'll see throughout the entirety of this talk as well. One is the fact that it's how we develop the features. That everybody looks at individual features, has got the microscope of that specific feature, but it's how they all interact together to create the game. So it's about bringing them all together to create that gameplay experience. And number 2 is that none of these are like, oh, we're going to get to this in however time, and we're going to work on that. All of the stuff that we'll talk about today is stuff that we're actively working on, and not in the inception, but we have in our hands. We can play it, we can see it, we're feedbacking on it. So it's something that we're fairly advanced along, and so hopefully we'll be able to pull back the curtain a little bit.
Yeah, that's some of the things that we're going to talk about, and I think we're about ready to start getting into it here. Some of the things will have aspects to show. Some of the things won't have aspects to show, like the star map, like Chris just said, and whatnot. Some of the things will be presented in test maps because we don't want to give away any Squadron 42 specific locations and stuff like that. That said, I think we can maybe show some stuff in Asiato because people have
we already
that.
showed at one location.
So you guys ready to? This enough preamble?
Let's go.
Let's start with Rich, you were the AFT guy. Now you're the whole squadron game guy. But let's start with something that affects everybody. This is a first-person universe, after all. Let's talk about the FPS radar and the player interaction system stuff. What can you tell us about how this has evolved?
It's interesting because we obviously, I think I've given a talk on FPS radar and scanning in the past, and I think the biggest thing that when we look at what Star Citizen is now, what's the first thing that you do? You know, you're in your bed. How do you interact with the game? How do you interact with the environment that's around you? Doors, getting into your ship. How do you interact with kiosks? And a lot of the thing that we realized is that, you know, and it's not something new, it's just something we've always wanted to get to, is how does the player interface with the game? How do they translate their controls and what they want them to do, you know, ultimately in the universe that they're playing, and how does that then translate in the computer game so that it does what you expect it to do? And I think one of the biggest things was the player interaction experience, where we kind of use this terminology to understand, like, that's like interact mode, personal inner thought, you know, the player interaction system, all of these umbrella systems that kind of sit underneath this main kind of like saga, shall we say. And I think that's one of the things that we really want to improve and make better, because I think it's lacking right now. If you go and walk around the universe, you know, generally having to go into interact mode, having to use the cursor, having to select things, you know, and we've spent a lot of time trying to make the world physical and feel right and immersed, that you're immersed in it.
Well, you can interact with things, like the props are interactable.
Exactly.
You can do things, you can push things around, you can move them. I mean, the whole goal is to make it a sort of physically living universe.
Exactly.
That you can interact with to a level that in most FPS games you don't, right? Because most FPS games you run around, you shoot things, maybe you pick up a gun that gets dropped, but you generally, most everything's static. And so our goal definitely for the PU, it's one of the reasons why we're doing the persistent, you know, the whole idea of persistent streaming and later on the server meshing, is to have this fully persistent universe that, yeah, you can push the chairs around, or that cup I could take off your desk and take it to my spaceship instead of your spaceship, Jared. and it will be there and it'll persist. So obviously interacting with things is a huge deal. In Squadron, we have a huge amount of physical puzzles, interactions, in a level that I haven't seen in a lot of FPS games. So it's almost like a sort of story game and a puzzle game and a traversal game and a combat game and a stealth game and a flight game all rolled into one. And so we need systems that are easy to use. And, you know, currently what we have, ideas were good, but it's pretty clunky. So we've been really focusing on it, because also we want you to be able, keyboard, mouse. What if you joystick? What if you have a gamepad? We need to make sure all that stuff works well. So we don't want to have 400 key presses you have to remember to do stuff, and we don't want it to take forever to interact and do stuff. And so we've really been thinking about it. Those are, by the way, have been large complaints on the PU, just getting in, new person getting into the game, like, how do I get out of bed? How do I do some basic stuff? How do I understand? You know, right now it's sort of trial by fire. I mean, I think, you know, there's a lot of people, it's almost like, you know, I don't know whether it's a From Software thing where it's like, oh, I managed to beat the challenge of Star Citizen and I actually got to my ship. But you know, we need to make that better, and so that is actually one of the big things we've been focusing on, and the player interaction system. And by the way, these have been plans that have been around for quite a while.
Absolutely.
And you know, Rich, back when he was in charge of sort of the core gameplay group, which was the AFT and the weapon teams and the actor tech team and stuff, that was on the list of things to do. It just, you know, because of what we talked about, the release cadence in Star Citizen on the alpha, it just, you know, didn't get to it yet. Well, we're getting to it now, and you know, we're working on it. So I mean,
part of it is basically removing the barrier. Yeah. So removing the clunkiness, as Chris said, to how to interact with with the environment. So what we've kind of gone to kind of this weighted system. So if you're walking over to a trolley, you know, you shouldn't have to like look exactly at the handle to be able to go, oh, I want to use the trolley. You just want to be able to go over there, and the game, you go, I want to interact with the trolley. You just press F, and the game should know, yeah, they want to interact with the trolley. So if I'm looking at your desk, for example, you've got quite a lot of things that I could pick up and take and do whatever I want. But you want to be able to just walk over there and not have to go into a mouse cursor mode to be able to then select it. You should just be able to go, I want to look at the green ship. I'm going to pick up the green ship. I want to look at, you know, your little mini ship over there, or the book, or your coffee cup, or whatever. And you just want to be able to go and look at those things, press F, and you need confidence that when you're looking at something and we have the user interface to tell you that, yes, this is the thing that you're going to pick up. And you don't want to have to go into this separate mode to be able to do that. So I think that's one of the fundamental things on the player interaction experience, and that's such a pervasive system across the entirety, because it's the same when you're in a cockpit. In a cockpit, or you're walking around, or you're in EVA, or you're crouched, or you're prone, or all the different environments that you're in. You need to be able to just effortlessly interact with the game world, and you want it to just feel natural and immersed, because you want to get involved in what you're doing in the gameplay, not have to fight the controls. And then on the other side of things, which is FPS radar and scanning, it's actually kind of being split into kind of a twofold. The first area is kind of what we're calling kind of like a quick scan. This is something that, again, if you think of the Star Citizen universe, it's very detailed. That's one of our strengths, that we're detail at scale. And so you want to be able to go in and understand all the individual pieces, that you can go in and go, I want to move that thing, or I want to go and get in a giant ship. But sometimes it's quite difficult to realize, okay, what is environment, or what is interactive, or which bits are relevant to me. For example, if you look at Uncharted, they have, painted areas to show you where you need to go and where you need to navigate. But that's not Star Citizen. Star Citizen's built on realism and the reality of the world. So what we want to do is have kind of like the radar and scanning system, where you can do this kind of like quick ping or quick scan wave, single button, and that is kind of just for your local environment, and everything will then be tagged as you look at it. So kind of think, I look at the camera, it'll come out and it'll have a little box, info box, and it'll say, okay, this is the model of the camera, this is the information. And it's almost like you've done a little mini scan on the camera, but it's happening for everything around you. And you can just quickly look around and be like, oh, there's a cuttable surface there because I want to be able to use my multi-tool cutter. Oh, there's a vent there that I can get access to. Oh, there's a terminal there that I can hack. And I'm getting that information. It's almost like that Blade Runner-esque of like, I go into a space and I can go, okay, what are the ingredients that I have to play with as a player for me to be able to progress to the next area? And then we've got the other side of things, which is radar and scanning, which is what we're calling like a charged scan wave, where...
That frosty air can only mean we're back in your favourite winter wonderland, Microtech. We're currently gearing up to head to the Tobin Expo Centre in cooler than cool New Babbage, and seizing the opportunity to put this Anvil Spartan through its proverbial paces. The team designed this not-so-little beauty specifically to transport the most precious cargo of all, your friends, family, favourite heavily armed mercenary outfit, etc. So if you're looking to get a load of folks from point A to point B and keep them all in one piece, then the Spartan was seemingly designed just for you. But this is Whitley's guide, so we aren't just going to take Anvil's word for it. Plus, hey Marty, how are you? I needed some personnel to, looking good Merrill, to transport for this segment, and there's nothing my good to see you Terry executives here like more than not paying extras. Everybody in? Off we go. Machine, Anvil uses the Atlas platform that their ballista anti-aircraft unit is built on. So they obviously aren't taking personnel transport lightly, so to speak. But I want to find out just how heavy this metal really is. And since this rig's low profile keeps us safe from those anti-aircraft turrets, Jimmy here is about to make things a little more interesting. We're about to find out if this Spartan can stay cool under pressure, whilst keeping our friends back there relatively comfortable in the face of impossibly heavy turbulence. Not good! Oh, I don't come any closer than that! You hear that? That sound of silence means we've all survived, thanks to the handling of Anvil's Road Warrior. Which is all well and good, because we're here.
Out across wider areas, and that's where you're looking at, you know, individuals. You're getting, okay, there's 2 guys over there. What's their details? Oh, there's an NPC over there. Okay, I can see an objective that I need to complete. And that's a bit more, because that's more gameplay pervasive. That's something that's going to be more of a risk reward. So that's like, okay, I'm giving my location away, but they're also, so they may or may not, know that they've been scanned. If it's a player, they absolutely will be. And that's all underpinned off the signature system that we do for radar scanning of the ships, as at FPS. So it's all systemic. It's not, we have to go in and they go, oh, it's this custom setup. So we have this kind of usability aspect for radar and scanning for people to be able to go in and understand. I think there's been plenty of Reddit posts over the years of people go, oh, I wish scanning, radar and scanner would do this and show me little info boxes. And yeah, we have that up and running. So there's that aspect of it which kind of ties in with the player interaction experience of how you play the game and how do you understand what you need to do. And then there's the other side of things, which is then it's a more of a proactive tool of you looking through the environment and finding what you want.
We have a couple of videos. Should we show some videos of those?
So I understand we have 2 videos. What's this first one we're going to look at?
So the first one is more kind of showing what I described with radar scanning, that first aspect. So you're going into a space, you're doing a quick scan wave, and then it's quickly showing you up the little bits that you can interact with.
All right, let's take a look at FPS radar and Pi 1.
So you can see here, this is in Asiado, which we've already showcased. This is obviously going in and utilizing some of our new building blocks UI for the doors. And then here's a scan wave, and you can see that I'm looking at that data pad, and then you can move around, and it's giving me that information. So right now, it's just giving you the basic high-level information in terms of the names and things. But you will also have more detailed information depending on, contextually what the item is. And what you're seeing here is part of the player interaction system. So you can just, even though that's kind of a complex area, there's lots of little things that you can interact with, but you're getting confidence of, oh, cool, I can grab that, or I can use the data pad. And you're not having to go into interact mode. You're not having to be driven by the cursor. You can go in and just press F or interact with it. And you've probably seen this in plenty of AAA games, but they don't have the detail and at scale that we do. So we wanted to make sure that system is really robust. But hopefully it gives you kind of an idea of. And
I'd also say that part of the idea is that there's the default action, which in this case is what you see when you're on it when it says grab or I think there's a few other ones that you can use as your default action. But the icon, if you just had a single disk with that wasn't broken, then that would mean there's only one thing you can do with it. In a lot of those cases, you could see there was a broken disk in 4 pieces, which was basically saying that's a multi-action. So as you look at it, if, for instance, in that case, if you hit F, it does the default action. If you held F, it would bring up the modular wheel that would show you the other actions. So you could maybe equip it versus grab it or whatever you would do. And so the idea is just like you can do in Rich was talking about a lot of other sort of AAA, even console games. You walk around, you look around, oh, look, I can extra do something with it, right? So there's a bit of that's happening here. So you can just look around and I can interact without having to hold F, move your mouse around and all the rest of stuff. I mean, we'll still have the overall interact mode that you can go into if you want, but the idea is I just play around if I'm used to playing games a certain way. So there is a certain language of, I think, FPS or even third-person games that exist right now. And we don't want to do something totally different to it because people are used to playing games a certain way. It's like why in an FPS game you run around with WASD and use the mouse because so many people are used to it. And so we're leaning a little bit onto that, but trying to make it much more usable and work with inside a much more powerful system than you typically get in games. And so even there, you saw there's a lot of interactables. You look at them, you can move them around, do all these different things with it, and hopefully it'll be much more intuitive for players in Squadron or Star Citizen.
And that default item actions is a good point, because that's also something we've gone to and we're changing in the fact that we want everything to have a default action that essentially you go over, you press F, it always does that default action. But let's say you're harvesting harvestables, and you want, the default action is that it picks it up and puts it into your hand, but you want it to always be to store into your backpack. You'll actually be able to go in there, right-click on the item, when you're in interact mode, bring up the wheel, or like Chris says, hold F and it will bring up the wheel, and that will replace that list that we have currently right now, and you'll actually be able to remap that in the game, like 3 clicks, and you go, I don't want it to be pick up into my hand, I want it to go straight into my backpack, because that's what you're doing right there. So then you can go and have it, it allows us to give the interaction system how we want it to be by default, but then it puts the onus on the player. If they want it to go, they want a weapon to always go to their backpack because they're happy with the weapons they've already got and they're going looting, they just want it all to be store, they can do that out of the gate so it doesn't always go into their hands. And they have that customizability to be able to, interact with the environment and the objects that they're looking at.
Before we move on, we have a second video.
Yeah.
Yes.
I haven't seen this one. You want to set it up, or you want to just go into playing it?
Sure.
Play it when you
Yeah,
talk
play
about
it. So I mean, the second one, essentially, what we're about to see is kind of what I talked about. This is the second half of radon scanning. So this is where they're still getting the environmental information, like whether you've got a vent or a terminal or a hacking area, but you're also now getting information about the enemies and the AI and what's out there. So it's a wider and broader.
Yeah, I mean, this is where you basically, it's almost like whether it's X-ray vision or you can hear it through the wall, but you could track someone on the other side of a wall, but you're doing the charge scan, which is much more risky because it's noisy, and if people go, oh, someone's scanning, maybe there's someone over there and they can track you down. But it'd be useful in like when you're stealthing around, it's like you're going to go around a corner, you don't know if there's some enemies around the corner, and you want to find out. You use this.
It's very useful.
Yeah,
having played lots of levels.
Definitely, because in Squadron, we're trying to have a certain amount of realism. So you're not just going to go and gun down 400 people. So we want you, when you're in situations, you're outnumbered, and you have to. It's more of a stealth game in the FPS than it is a straight out run and gun shooter.
Bring it to the point of realism, then bring it back to the point of fun. As you said.
Well, there's a lot of fun stealth games.
All right, so I want to see this clip. I haven't seen it yet. Let's roll FPS 2.
So what you're seeing here is that he's going to do a scan wave in a moment. Essentially what you'll see is that it's now penetrating through the walls, and now you can start to see the slavers that are in this environment. Now these slavers don't necessarily have a radon scanner, so they're not able to pick you up. So what will happen is when you do a scan wave or a charge scan wave, your signatures will basically skyrocket. So that's what will give you away to other people. So in the PvP environment, you're only getting, it's a big risk. If you want to do it, but you're giving away your location. So if you're willing to do that, then so be it. But in a more of a PvE environment, what we're going to do is we're going to have tailored. Some enemies will have radon scanning and some won't. So if they do, then they'll be like, hey, I've just been pinged, and they'll get your location, and then they'll go and investigate. So what you're seeing here, on that video is kind of a wider, broader area and seeing through the walls, whereas the first one is kind of a more limited scope. And you can, it's up to the player to choose which one they want to do. The first one is really more about just, we want to encourage the player to go into an environment and go, okay, cool, I'm in this room. What things do I have to interact with? And then the second one is more of a wider scope, like Chris said. When we're playing our stealth levels, you need to have kind of a good understanding of where they are, and it's only temporary. And you will have a cooldown on that charge scan wave, so you're not just going to be able to spam it there forever. It's like you get a temporary picture, and you go, cool, I've got a good snapshot. Now I'm going to make my move and go forward.
So while we're still here on the first-person experience, the player experience, let's stick to a couple more topics that are related just to the player before we move into ships and bigger stuff. Ledges and ladders. Everybody knows the struggles of elevators in the persistent universe, but that's not the only way to, traverse the universe to get around and stuff. I understand that you guys have made a number of improvements to mantling over ledges and how to use ladders. I
mean, Legends and Ladders is kind of
the best game I ever played.
It's like a board game. Yeah, exactly, absolutely. It's kind of two features that we're focusing on, but I mean, as Chris said, in terms of Squadron development, we're looking at improving the entirety of the traversal experience. How does the player move, and just from general locomotion and how that feels, and then in terms of the traversal moves, so vaulting, mantling, ladders, and so on and so forth. So one of the two areas that we've identified that we wanted to push for was A for ledges, which is we wanted you to be able to, oh, I've slightly misjudged my jump because I'm in first person, you know, I can't see my feet. And it's, you know, it's kind of frustrating. You're like, oh, it's just right there. If this was real life, I'd just put my hands out and grab it, right? So that's the first part, that we can actually grab onto ledges now that you're falling past, so that you can actually then pull yourself up, which adds just, it's to be honest, it's huge. Like we've built traversal levels now, and it's the difference is night and day, because when you're in a first person, it's very difficult to judge like right on the edge. So we can add a bit more challenge to the traversal so that you're actually moving around with ledges and grabbing and pulling yourself up. And then the other side of things, which doesn't necessarily sound that interesting in terms of, oh, it's improved ladders. But again, is if you play the Star System right now, you get onto a ladder, you're looking bolt straight forward at the wall, you're locked, you can't look around, you have no spatial awareness. It's just, that's it. You're locked in, you can't get off halfway, you can't jump off, you're kind of very locked. So what we've done...
Jump on halfway too.
No, exactly. So what we did is we kind of leveraged how we did body dragging, and that, you know, even though you're attached to this thing, you want to be able to look around. So you can attach to the ladder, you can jump onto a ladder directly, you can run and jump onto a ladder, you can look around full 360 degrees, you can look around 90 degrees as you're going up. You know, and it's just a lot more fluid and a lot more, you know, it doesn't feel like, oh, now I'm locked in. It just feels like you're more of a human being on the ladder, and you can look around. And then, obviously, if you can look behind you on a ladder, that opens up environment, you know, opens up scope to jumping from that onto something else. So it's...
because you can jump off the ladder halfway up it or wherever.
Exactly.
So there's a huge amount of, I mean, in Squadron, we're putting a lot of traversal gameplay in, which will make its way into the PU when all these sort of systems settle, and I think you'll see a lot more. I mean, you already see a little bit where, you know, you could use a tractor gun to put a crate over or push something to get up and look at stuff in derelicts right now, for instance, in the PU. But imagine a whole level above that, which is kind of what's in Squadron. I mean, even that in the derelicts was really inspired by some of the early work we were doing in